Good evening. I'd like to call our council meeting to order at 6 p.m. This evening. Hello to colleagues on council. To my far left is Councillor Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rentoul. To my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, and Councillor Garnett. I'm Mayor McNeil-Smith. Good evening to staff joining our meeting this evening, and good evening to members of the public who are here in attendance in the chamber, but also to those who may be watching the live webcast or a recording of the meeting at a later date. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're holding our meeting this evening in the territory of the Saanich Nations. Want to acknowledge that today is the 54th Earth Day, established since 1970. And when I provide the territorial acknowledgement this evening, I think it's appropriate that we make reference to Earth Day. We make reference to the stewardship by the Saanich people of these lands and waters for millennia, that is thousands of years. And that our ongoing commitment to work government to government with Saanich Nations on the stewardship of these lands for ourselves and future generations. In turning to approval of the agenda, since it was published last Thursday, we have some additional correspondence. I will make reference to that now. We have 6 additional pieces of correspondence under item 5A, which is the zoning amendment bylaw for 2180 Beacon Avenue. I just want to acknowledge those folks who corresponded. S. Mascary, D. Lucas, J. Elsom, V. Pates, G. Moffat, and B. Wong. Under item 6A, which is the heat pump variance, we have a piece of correspondence from C. and R. Barton. And we've received a piece of correspondence from D. Jelena under item 12A, which is our zoning bylaw amendments. One additional change to the agenda is Councillor Duncan has requested providing a verbal report on the Victoria Airport Authority Noise Committee that she represents council on. So with those changes, I would look for a mover and seconder that our agenda be approved as amended. Councillor Duck?
Second.
Councillor Novick, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries. Thank you, Council. We're now turning to our public participation period, where we invite members of the public to come forward and speak to Council for up to 4 minutes. We ask that you provide your name and your municipality that you reside in or the organization that you represent. I anticipate we may have a number of speakers tonight, and in our Council Procedures bylaw, we do want to be fair and allow every member of the public to speak for 4 minutes, so we would ask that you keep your remarks to 4 minutes this evening, and we do have a timer to help guide us in that process. And so I will turn to our first speaker. Good evening.
Murray Weisenberger, I live at Unit 203.
Microphone, please.
Oh,
there we go.
it's red now. That's good?
No, your time will start now.
Murray Weisenberger, Unit 203, 9805 2nd Street, the landmark building just over there. I'll take well under 4 minutes. Now, I expect this agenda item will pass, and if I were in your place, I would be voting in favor of it as well. So it's provincial regulations require that, so I don't expect there'll be much that can be done about that. I ride my tricycle past the site regularly, and there are issues around livability for the tenants that I'd like to talk about briefly. Units will be very close to the highway, and high volume traffic with extended periods of idling for traffic lights and peak ferry times. Emissions from gas, and more importantly diesel vehicles, will affect the air quality in this 5-story proposal. Diesel rigs also run through the night to service C-SPAN truck and trailer operation. Future traffic increases could require, for example, an express overpass lane or some other way to deal with traffic along the way, which would also be a problem with that. Now, I know this is going to go ahead, so I'm hoping that someone will take note of those items that I talked about. They'll be considered by the development group, and it'll result in things such as triple glazed windows, which would help with the noise, and to do something about the particulates so that air quality inside the building is looked after, especially in a building that's likely to have children. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming forward this evening. I'll call for a second time. Anyone wishing to come forward? Good evening.
Good evening. David Calverley, a resident of Sydney. I often wonder whether I've overstayed my welcome here. But this evening I'd like to speak in respect to 12A, Recommendation 2 concerning public engagement on the draft zoning bylaw. I naturally support the idea of public engagement, and I'd like to hear that it be proactive and robust. Earlier this year, the comment was made in Council that communication is a two-way street, and that it is also the responsibility of residents to stay on top of town hall business and ask questions as much as it is for staff to inform the public. That approach may well work for a change to the tree preservation bylaw, but I feel it's inadequate for a complicated and dry bylaw detailing dramatic changes to land use. Some questions are urgent. Will you be making it clear to the public that there could be a number of development options in the intensive residential zones, including two separate principal dwellings within a secondary suite, each with a secondary suite? Will the implications of the proposed RM7WS zone and the M2 zone be clearly explained to the residents of the Gallahan neighbourhood? I can't understand them. What is currently a neighbouring family home could become a combined ground floor machine shop and upper level residential suite. I didn't know that. I'm not suggesting it could, simply making the point that I don't know. Do they? I'm aware of the late edition letter and accompanying exchanges between Mr. Jelena and staff concerning the impact on properties adjacent to a natural boundary of water. Setbacks to increase from 7.5 to 15 metres. That affects me. This was time consuming for both Mr. Jelena and the staff, but such clarifications are necessary. I just wonder how the affected properties, as much as 30% of Sydney's waterfront, are going to get advised of that. I fear that many residents will not pay much attention, but they will rely on their elected representatives, who promise to listen, to keep them informed, especially if they could be adversely affected. I think that public engagement needs to start immediately and not wait for the planned open houses with the hope that residents will turn up, knowing there will be big changes, and ask informed questions. I suggest now is the time for intensive advertising and, as quickly as possible, a town talk detailing the changes to be made in detail and the possible impacts, with an explanation at least as comprehensive as the responses from staff to Mr. Jelena. The town has an excellent communications manager who could take the staff report and prepare a town talk on very short notice. How about an open house? If that costs money, so be it. The amounts involved could only be a very tiny part of what is a large budget. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward this evening. I'll turn to our next speaker who wishes to come forward. Good evening. There's just a microphone there if you just want to pop the button. Just a little.
Hello. Thanks, everyone.
Sorry.
All right. Strike three almost. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being in touch with me via text and keeping us all knowing what's going on. I wanted to just add on to what the gentleman...
Sorry, if you could provide your name and place of
Oh,
residence.
yes, of course, sorry. It's John, Jon, Rendell, Rendle. I'm at apartment 304-9972 3rd Street. And I just wanted to reiterate, I think what, talking to other tenants, we're just kind of wondering what's going on, and we don't know. It seems to be in limbo. We have a relatively short time that most of us are going to try and be out by May 30th, I think. And any kind of clarification you guys can give us as to what's happening. Are we going to be able to stay longer at the building we're at? Is it going to be rezoned for rental houses? Are they building the condos? I still don't really know anything for sure, and that's just kind of my question.
Yeah, we appreciate your question this evening. It's not an item that's on our agenda.
Okay.
The RM6, our zoning, I mean, will affect rental properties, including those. But residents within those buildings have reached out to staff. A council member and I met with two of the residents last week. And I encourage you to reach out to staff directly with any questions that you may have.
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry for the cap. Haircuts on Thursday.
Not at all.
Okay.
We appreciate you coming forward this evening. And I'll call for a third time if anyone's wishing to come forward. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Gerald Moffat. I live at 9512 Lochside Drive. It's still possible to say no to the Beacon project despite the EB edicts. A month or so ago, Mayor and Council said yes to a very good project, Cedarwood. It's a great fit for the neighborhood and for Sydney as a whole. Tonight, Mayor and Council should say no to a very bad project, 2180 Beacon. It's a terrible fit with both the local neighborhood and with Sydney as a whole. The project is grotesquely oversized. It should be broken up into multiple smaller units, as several councillors and the Advisory Planning Commission recommended. This project is over-densification on steroids. It will have nearly 2.5 times the density in terms of units per acre as the Cedarwood. Moreover, the Beacon development will cause serious local traffic problems and impede any future development of the Beacon-Pat Bay intersection. This is a project that would be better off in a Siberian mining town. Mayor and Council are acutely aware that many young people, many workers, many families are shut out of buying a house and can only rent by spending 50, 60, 70% or more of their total income. Understandably, Mayor and Council want to do something about this. Your hearts are in the right place. But it's not enough for your heart to be in the right place. Your head has to be in the right place too. The rents in this building are very high. A 2-bedroom unit will rent for $3,500 a month. To be affordable, that would require a household income of $140,000 a year, above the 95th percentile in Sydney. Yes, 20% of the units will go for 20% less than market. But 20% off a 2-bedroom unit is still $2,700 a month. Median renters would be spending over 60% of their $50,000 household income. This development targets only the wealthy and professionals and managers, not young people, ordinary workers, or ordinary families. It doesn't meet Sydney's needs or objectives. But perhaps Mayor and Council feel they can't say no. Perhaps you feel trapped by both the West Side Local Area Plan and by the EB edicts. No, you are not trapped. Not if you take the OCP seriously and not just as a collection of platitudes. For instance, Objective 521 of the OCP states, to ensure housing densities and height are compatible with the content of the surrounding neighborhood. Yes, 5 stories is on side with the West Side Local Area Plan, but that height combined with the enormous size of the development makes it offside. Saying no to this development tonight does not mean saying no to any future development on the site. There will be other proposals and other developers. A no tonight will help ensure those future proposals are a better fit for Sydney. I remind Mayor and Council that it took 3 tries to get the Cedarwood right. The first 2 were oversized 5-story ones. It got it right in the end. Mayor and Council can say no tonight to the Beacon development and yes to a much better proposal in the future. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for coming forward. I'll turn to the next speaker. Please come forward.
Hello, Bernadine Vandermeer, and I live at 9851 2nd Street in Sydney. I'm here to just ask Council with regard to the draft zoning bylaw. I have concerns about how rapidly this is now moving forward, and I'd like to see a longer engagement period with the public. Having been involved with the OCP, there were a number of opportunities for the public to be involved and to give input. Now we're sitting here at a very tight deadline with the zoning bylaw, and I'm wondering if there might be some opportunity to break the parts of the zoning bylaw that need to go through in June off and actually have those pieces go through because of provincial legislation that's driving this driving this forward. And having the other parts of the zoning bylaw that maybe don't have to go through in June have a longer public engagement period. I see that the town is proposing 2 open houses, and that is great. But when I see that with the OCP, there were multiple opportunities for people to be involved, I'm alarmed at how short the time period is going to be for the public to comment. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. I'll turn to our next speaker if they wish to come forward. Good evening.
Mayor and Council, Dennis Carlson, resident of Sydney. I'm speaking tonight regarding the bylaw that's on your agenda tonight for consideration for 2180 Beacon. After reading the bylaw and reading the October 23rd council resolution, I'm left with some questions. Starting with parks contribution. In the October 23rd staff report, the staff acknowledged that there was need for additional parks in the Galeran neighborhood. I understand that the bylaw under consideration does have a parks contribution requirement, but my question is more as to whether council has adopted a parks acquisition strategy for the Galeran neighborhood. My second item is regarding noise attenuation. A noise attenuation study was submitted as part of the application, which, as I understand, acknowledged that the noise levels from the highway would be significantly above acceptable limits. The study did recommend higher standards of wall systems and windows that would reduce the sound impact to residents of the building. In reviewing the bylaw, I see there is a requirement that residents acknowledge that there will be noise from the airport and the highway. What I don't see, and my question is, how will these noise attenuation measures that were contained in this report be secured as part of this development? Finally, in regard to Beacon Avenue and access, I understand the rezoning bylaw will be required to be signed off by MODI prior to the adoption of the bylaw. So my question is, will the comments from MODI regarding access onto Beacon Avenue be shared with the residents of Jan Place? Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward and for your questions. I'll turn to Ms. Nelson.
Mr. Mayor, we have a lady online waiting to speak during public participation period. Just a
Okay,
reminder.
thank you for the reminder, and I do have the note before me. Thank you for that, Ms. Nelson. Now we'll,
Excuse me, Mayor, do you want to make a motion to extend the public participation?
please, if you would, Councillor Garnett.
I'll move that we extend public participation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries unanimous. And I do want to now turn to Sandy Haworth. If you can hear me, please connect. If you can confirm your audio, and you do have 4 minutes to speak before council, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Oh, okay, perfect. So first off, thank you all for your time this evening. My name is Sandy Haworth. I live at 2162 Jan Place. As a resident of the West Sydney's Galeran neighborhood, I reside on Jan Place and wish to address 2 of the agenda items tonight. The first of which is the zoning amendment for 2180 Beacon West, and also the proposed rezoning for the Galeran neighborhood, including the micro rezoning for specific properties. Our neighborhood already faces significant challenges with traffic congestion, lack of parking, street accessibility, and pedestrian safety. Increasing the population density without taking adequate time to review the proposed zoning and impact will make this area unbearable to live in. On our street, you will see charming bungalows and 2-story houses, all showing pride of ownership. My neighbors are families with small children, working professionals, and retirees. We all live, work, volunteer, and support local events and merchants in the Sydney area, and we pay our taxes at the same rate as the East Sydney residents do. Yet we are often left with the impression from the town of Sydney that we are second class on our side of the highway. There is a long history of our concerns and issues being ignored. Honestly, I wasn't even going to speak tonight. The past few years, we have all attended countless public information sessions and meetings. We have shared our feedback on new proposals, developments, the OCP, the West Side Local Area Plan, the Gateway Commercial Development, the Skylark Multifamily Development, and the proposed development at 2180 Beacon. Overall, we feel our voices aren't being heard, and many of our neighbors have simply given up trying. We are tired of fighting for our rights in West Sydney. We are also dealing with construction fatigue, having endured the dirt, noise, and disruption from the construction of the Amazon building, which would often go till 2 or 3 in the morning, and most recently, the construction at the new roundabout. And then on the horizon, we have other projects coming up. The new hotel on the corner of Beacon and the highway. The property at 2114 Beacon is in final sale, and we understand a multifamily development will be built there. And of course, the monstrosity at 2180 Beacon. Many individuals have already spoken about the concerns around the 2180 development. Tonight, I'm only going to focus on one of those, which is pedestrian and vehicle traffic. Galaran is a very busy road, high volume with frequent traffic congestion, exacerbated by the Amazon delivery vehicles. The Amazon delivery vans exit the loading area directly across from Jan Place, and the drivers often disregard the stop sign, making it very challenging to find a gap in traffic to turn left onto Galaran. In addition, the Amazon contract drivers further contribute to the traffic chaos. Apparently, they're not allowed to park on the Amazon lot, so they park on Galaran and the neighboring streets. They drive down our streets at high rates of speed and constantly use the resident driveways to turn around. When the street parking is full on the Amazon side of Galaran, they just drive on the wrong side of the road, park on the wrong side of the road, and they block our access to the mailboxes. It's a little exciting to drive through the roundabout construction at night to hit headlights directly in your lane. It's their vehicle sitting there. I don't know why, but they leave their headlights on. It's dangerous. Despite our complaints to the town of Sydney, Amazon, and the RCMP, yet again, no action has been taken. We have provided photos and videos of the situation. We have put official complaints in with the RCMP, and just like during the construction phase, nothing is done. My concern is that the additional vehicle traffic and parking congestion that will result in the additional 140 units at Beacon will make this area intolerable. The development only has 1 assigned parking spots. There's 140 units, but most of those apartments will have 2 vehicles. Where do those extra 70 vehicles park?
Ms. Harwath, I've let you go a little past 4 minutes. If you could wrap up with a final comment, please.
You bet. So just concerns about the extra traffic, et cetera, that development is going to bring in. And then my second point was the zoning changes to the town for the Galaran neighborhood. Just asking for there to be adequate time. We need adequate communications, engagements, and opportunity for residents to ask questions, provide feedback, and have input. These zoning changes will have a long-term effect on our neighborhood. And I'm concerned about the micro zoning changes, where 2 out of 14 homes on the same side of the street will have different zoning. I'm concerned about that, about my rights as a homeowner. What can I do with my property, and how will my tax rate be affected? Thank you, Mary, for the extra time.
Thank you. Thank you for coming forward this evening. We appreciate your input. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Dean Strongatharm. I'm a land use planner and involved with the application for 2180 Beacon Avenue. I'm here speaking on behalf of the owner. I've been doing this work for, I'm afraid to admit how many decades, and have believed that the merits of this application are overwhelming and deserving of council's support. In support of the application, I'd like to make just a few comments. Taking the verbatim comments from the October 23rd, 2023 staff report to council, it states, the proposal is consistent with the objectives and policies contained in the official community plan, and more specifically with Schedule B, the West Side Area Local Area Plan. The proposal is consistent with the design guidelines contained in the West Side Plan. The proposal will deliver 140 rental housing units, contributing to the provincial housing's mandate given to all local governments. The majority of the units, 55%, are 2 and 3 bedroom units, larger than most typical new apartment units that are built these days, and certainly more conducive to family living, recognizing, of course, the major employment centers immediately surrounding the property, the site. The proposal has a robust list of amenities for residents, including inside recreation spaces, outside patio spaces, children's playground, pathways, extensive landscaping, and garden plots. There is also a long list of community amenities, including pedestrian connection from Jan Place to the highway pathway, off-site storm drainage and domestic water improvements, significant improvements along Beacon Avenue, and cash contributions to the bylaw standards for future park acquisition on the west side. And I think importantly, the applicant has agreed to provide 20% of the units for 20 years at 20% below market. I can say that I do a lot of development pro forma work and very familiar with costs and as I say, pro forma work. And I can only say that this is a very generous offer that is made, and most other developments that I'm involved with where there is below market units provided, nothing compares in terms of the number of units that are offered with this application. Finally, I believe that the applicant has been responsive to suggestions and input by staff, by council, and the neighborhood in terms of revisions to plan over the last numbers of months that have included such things as increasing articulation of the building, increased setbacks to minimize impacts, carrying out acoustical reports and promising to implement them, which includes exterior materials to the siding that will meet CMHC standards, triple glazing, window glazing, and the like, and reconfiguring site spaces to take advantage of solar conditions. I would also say that the application was referred to MOTI as part of the referral process, to which there is a response back to staff saying that they support the application. There's no issues with it. In closing, I do believe that this application merits council's support and would certainly agree with or favor council's consideration for giving the bylaw 3 readings this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming forward. I'll call for a final time if there's anyone wishing to come forward this evening. And seeing none, I will pause just a moment. Good evening.
Is it on? Okay. Good evening. My name is Sarah Waddington. I live at 9972 3rd Street. Within draft bylaw number 2275, the new RM6 zoning or rental zoning is based on affordable and attainable housing policies within Sydney's official community plan. The draft RM6R referenced these policies with the intention of an RM6R zone to support and protect rental housing in Sydney. Unfortunately, there is no reference of how issues of affordable housing, attainable housing, or tenant protections are to be addressed. Ideally, the intent of the zoning should reflect the policies it relates to. Without that, sites rezoned as RM6R rental could be developed into luxury rentals, resulting in the affordable and attainable policies of the zoning it is based on to be overlooked. Currently, my apartment building and that of my neighbors are planned for demolition. This includes 2 apartment buildings and 1 small cottage. The plan is to replace these with 72 condo units, which doesn't consider that the existing apartment buildings are currently offering affordable homes to the tenants. Some of these are families with children who live together in 1-bedroom apartments. Another neighbor, a single pensioner, has planned to move into her car, as finding an affordable rental here doesn't appear to be an option. For each affordable housing unit lost, Should another replace it so affordable housing stock is not further depleted? Ideally, this could be achieved in a way that would allow a displaced tenant to transition into new housing available at the time they are required to vacate. Remember, we are talking of affordable housing. How can allowing the destruction of existable affordable units be seen as any sort of solution when it, in actuality, will reduce the available stock? As this is an issue faced by all communities, I look forward to Sydney Council's response and/or suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Not seeing any further speakers, we'll close public participation and maybe ask staff if we could just turn the mic, please. Thank you. So we're now turning to bylaws, and the first is 5A, which is bylaw number 2258, which is zoning amendment number 43 to our zoning bylaw to rezone the property at 2180 Beacon Avenue West from Comprehensive Development Zone 23, also known as CD 23, to Comprehensive Development Zone 43, CD 43, to allow for multi-unit residential development. As indicated, it indicates on the agenda that there was 2 written submissions, and as indicated during agenda approval that we've had 6 additional letters of correspondence, and we did have speakers come before us tonight to speak. So before I turn to council to consider a mover for first reading, and then second reading is when we typically have our deliberation, I want to first provide the opportunity to council to ask staff if they have any questions. And I would ask council to restrict their speaking to questions and not comments until we are in deliberation. I'll first turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. It was raised a couple times in the public participation about hearing from Modi. Have we heard from Modi, and if so, is that information being provided to the residents of John Place? Thank you. That's first of 1 questions.
Sir, I'll turn to staff. Good evening, Ms. Verhagen.
Good evening. Through the Mayor to Councillor Duck. Yes, I believe when the application first came forward to Committee of the Whole initially, there were comments included at that time from Modi, because as was indicated by the applicant, staff did send a referral to Modi, being Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, on the proposed development, asking if they had any comments at that time. I would have to go back and read that report and those minutes to refresh my memory, as it was some time ago, but they did not express any concern with the location of the building, and it was made clear by staff that access from Beacon would be right in, right out, and they did not express concerns with that either. But again, as far as more details than that, I'd have to go back and read that staff report to Committee of the Whole, but it was on the public agenda, so that information was public to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, if I may, Mayor.
Yes.
Second question is, was raised in public participation about parking, and a good question in terms of 140 units and having parking for each of those units, 1 spot. But as noted in the public participation, not likely that those households are going to just have 1 vehicle. So what's going to happen to those people parking, and where would they be parking? Thank you.
Again, through the Mayor to Councillor Duck, if I'd received the question ahead of time, I would have been able to check the parking calculation for the property, but I do recall it met the bylaw requirement, and I think that there were some surplus parking spaces. So we cannot require more than the bylaw requires. We can't assume what household structure will move in or what their ownership habits will be in terms of vehicles. So the project does meet the bylaw requirements. Thank you.
Councillor Duck, you have the floor.
Yes, if I may. I recall in the drawings that the access to John Place will be restricted to, I think, emergency vehicles. Is that still the case?
Yes, again, through the Mayor, the access to John Place would be restricted to emergency vehicles only at the start of the development. If in the future Modi redevelops the intersection at Beacon with some type of interchange, then the access to Beacon Avenue would be cut off, and that information was in a previous staff report to council as well, so that's public information too. And then the access on Jan would be the primary access, but that would be in the future if MOTI develops an interchange at Beacon.
Thank you, if I may, Mayor.
Yes.
I tried to look at the drawing today just to get the distance from the highway to the wall of the building. And do you know what that is offhand?
Thank you. No, again, I don't have time to look that up right now while everybody waits, and it would be measuring off of a aerial photo. But the property setback is 4.5 meters or 15 feet from property line, and then that property line, from there measuring towards the travel lanes of the highway, there's still the multi-use path, some landscaping, the quite wide swale or ditch, and then the gravel shoulder, and then the travel lane. So there's still quite some distance. I'm sorry, I just don't have the exact measurement. Thank you.
If I may continue. It was mentioned in public participation about the noise attenuation, and that's item H on the conditions under the bylaw. How is that going to be managed or ensure that it's met?
Thank you. Item H under the bylaw says register a noise covenant acknowledging industrial, airport, and highway noise and activity. So that is requiring a covenant on title so that any purchasers in the future are aware that this is not a quiet place and that these three existing uses are there and that they are allowed. The noise attenuation in the building, there was details in the development permit plans about that. So the development permit, again, if it is approved by council, if the zoning is approved, then that would be part of the development permit, and staff would be looking for that as part of the building permit review.
Thank you. If I may continue, Mayor. We're looking today to move it forward to CD 43, but in the zoning bylaw, the draft zoning map shows it as RM7. So is the intent that this zoning will change from CD 43 to RM7-West Side, WS, by the end of June?
Through the mayor, no. That was an oversight on the draft map, and that will be updated. Thank you.
Thank you. So within that, we have I'm guessing on the number, about 13 conditions that are part of that bylaw. Those conditions, what happens if there's a change to any one of them? Do we have to revisit the bylaw, or is there some mechanism around that? So it seems very encumbering to come back and revisit that bylaw. Thank you.
So those conditions there, we're looking at item 5 in the bylaw, 5, and then there's number I, and then 1 and 2. So 2 says prior to the issuance of building permit, the property owner shall, A through M, there's lots of conditions there. So as staff, when a building permit application is submitted, again, provided the development is approved, staff would be reviewing the zoning bylaw, looking for compliance in the building permit. So the building permit would not be issued until all of these requirements are met, and they're zoning conditions, so they would be embedded in the zoning bylaw. And the second part of your question is what if one of these things has to change? Then that would have to come back to council, because that would be a text amendment to the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Are there any other questions? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just one, there was a question about the parks acquisition. We're getting some contribution towards that. So a question through you to staff. I know that we did have a sort of a general parks acquisition strategy that we discussed last year, but I'm trying to recall if there was anything specific for Galaran in terms of potential locations, or if we know yet if there was specific strategy for parks in Galaran.
I'll turn to staff. I mean, council does recall last fall that we received the parks needs assessment, and
Right.
We gave consideration and did move forward in the purchase of a new local park. I think at that time it was indicated that staff would in future work for a parks acquisition plan, that we did not have one at that time, but that would be something that staff would be working on. I'll turn to staff if they can comment on that at this time. Ms. Verhagen?
Sure, thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. So a staff report did come to council with a discussion about park acquisition and park needs in this neighborhood. So I'd have to refer to that report for specifics, but it was described in that staff report, which was on the agenda, in terms of how this number was developed and what it was based on. So council did give direction after the parks needs assessment for a park acquisition study to be done. Corey, correct me. Sorry, Mr. Newcomb, correct me if the terminology there is wrong. A park acquisition strategy. That is in process right now. But council did include this parks contribution amount under 5IF there as part of your resolution.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Okay, seeing no further questions, I would look for a mover and seconder of first reading. Councillor Duncan?
I'll move first reading.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duck is opposed. The motion carries. I'd look for a mover and seconder of second reading.
I'll move second reading.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. This is where we have deliberation. I'll turn to the mover.
Thank you. I feel comfortable moving this forward because I know we've discussed this project many times over the years, and it has come forward with several redesigns. And we had a lot of public participation tonight, and all of the issues that were raised are ones that we've had many hours of discussion of already, and the developer has addressed in the past. I think a lot of it is that the last time this came forward was, I believe, 6 months ago. So perhaps it's just kind of further back in memory, but there was nothing that was a surprise. There was all of the things that are in this bylaw, the zoning bylaw, the conditions arose out of those previous discussions. Noise attenuation was one that Councillor Duck just brought up, and we had a very long discussion about that, I remember. And the internal air quality, I remember Councillor Novak brought that one up and had a very technical discussion with the developer as well. And so I'm confident that though people continue to raise these questions, this is another example of people continue to assert things and raise questions, particularly around parking, which whenever we collect data, do a study, or actually go out and do a rental parking study specifically for apartment buildings, and we find that people there use less on average than one parking space per spot per residence, for example. It may change with condos, it may change if these are higher value places because people can afford them more, but in general, renters keep to the parking spaces because it's a matter of affordability. These apartments will be built and based on the price for the people who live on the other side, who are making high wages in these industrial areas and live within walking, biking distance. So I'm not actually concerned about that. Yeah, I haven't seen anything where I would say this unfavorably compares in terms of the public outreach this developer has done to the Cedarwood site either. I know that they have been discussing this development with the people on John Place for a very long time, and much of the concerns of the John Place neighbors are reiterating their concerns, seeking the reassurance that what has been said before and over the many years we've been discussing this continue to be in place, and I'm confident that they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole, the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. Likewise, I'll support the amendment to bylaw number 2258, and there were a number of points raised again this evening that were good to have reinforced, I think, and I think one of the challenges all communities face around rental rates, and the point was made that, are these going to be reasonably affordable for their intended purpose? And I think the reality is the market is going to set rental rates ultimately, and until we get rental inventory built, there's not going to be that environment to encourage those rental rates to come down. So I'm pleased that this has a 20% below market value component to it. I'm pleased that this is a dedicated rental project for 30 years. And my hope is, as we see more rental developments built in Sydney, that supply and demand is going to force those rental rates down further. We don't have a number of options like this to make a big impact. This project does make a big impact in a short time. I get the concerns about traffic congestion, and I'm optimistic that the infrastructure that's currently been developed with an aim to help move traffic through this area is going to be helpful. The town strategic plan also identifies addressing a pedestrian overpass at this location, which I think illustrates, I hope, to residents, the town's, understanding to need to further address traffic and pedestrian infrastructure in that area. I'll leave my comments there, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm in support of the motion for similar reasons. What I heard from the letters and the comments tonight were concerns about the sound, and it's been confirmed that there's going to be triple glazed windows. There's talk about the additional sound attenuation panels, so I'm satisfied with that. There was concern about whether Modi had confirmed whether there would be ingress and egress off of Beacon, and that's been confirmed, that they have no problems with that. There was also concern about the intersection at Beacon and the highway with the additional traffic, and that's on Modi's radar, and they will need to, they'll be looking at that, is my understanding, in the future with the different development that's going on in that area. Is it, in terms of the comments made about, is this the best place for a residential development with the fumes and the noise and the ferry traffic? Probably not. Personally, it's not a location that I would pick. However, the fact of the matter is that we are desperate for rental housing, and in Sydney we have such a small footprint. There's very few places where we can put this type of housing. 20% will be below market for 20 years. 20% will be adaptable units. We're getting a significant contribution towards park acquisition, and so I think it's something that it's desperately needed. We heard a speaker talk about the desperation for another buildings that are going to be torn down and lack of housing there. And while this new building might not meet their needs, at least as Councillor Rintoul says, it adds to the inventory, which I think we need. So for those reasons, I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll next turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor. I will not be supporting this zoning amendment, and not because of parking or traffic or any of those aspects, but I'm reminding my colleagues that APC, Advisory Planning Commission, over a year ago, was seriously concerned about the massing and the proximity to the highway. This is the only structure in CRD, I'm saying the only structure in CRD that is less than 30 feet from a highway. All others, even Langford, development capital, they're set back farther. We are putting this place up for rent, and we have a responsibility for the livability in our community. And I'm concerned that we're putting people in harm's way. Noise attenuation, pollution, proximity to the highway. And it's funny because I spoke to a former colleague that sat on this council in past years, and he said, that's what cheap housing is. I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. We can do better. This development can be built on that site and can be built differently that makes it more livable. And I will continue to oppose it to the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I spent pretty much my entire weekend looking through the Westlap and the OCP land use maps, and hearkening back to when we adopted the OCP bylaw in 2022, which I voted against. I had concerns about the Gallaran neighborhood. However, the council decided that we would adopt it, and I respect the decision that was made. And so within the confines of that, this proposal does meet what's required in the OCP, multi-unit residential, and it meets what is talked about in the Westlap, or West Side Local Area Plan. So those are two important factors that I went back and forth every day I went back into it again to see if there was something I wasn't seeing, or something that may not have pertained to it, but it fits within that. The developer has done their due diligence. They've made adjustments to the site. They've made adjustments in several capacities on the building. The housing agreement is important. We've heard people speak about what the rents are going to be in this building, but I glonged on to like a unit being $2,500, which is one of the examples in there. 20% off of $2,500 is $500. And in this economic climate, that is substantial to somebody. And I think it's important to realize that there's 28 units that will have below market rate, 20%. And we may not see that as significant, potentially, depending on our life circumstances. But to people, to the 28 different units that will be resided in by people, that will make a big difference to their lives, regardless of their income level. It's going to make a difference. And I think we can't lose sight of that. And we also can't lose sight of the fact that in my almost 6 years on council, the constant recurring theme I've heard from the business community and industries around us is we cannot attract and retain employees because we don't have housing for them. So how do we say to people in this community who run a business, I'm sorry, we could have provided housing for 140 potential people and families that would have helped your ability to keep your business alive, but it just wasn't quite perfect, and it's too close to the highway. And, you know, in a perfect world, it's not Eden. But it's housing. We're in a housing crisis. We've acknowledged that. I think every level of government, everybody at this table has acknowledged we're in a housing crisis. And I listened to the people who spoke earlier today about public participation from the apartment buildings on 3rd Street. There's a prime example. These people need housing, affordable housing, yes, for sure. And there's housing that we may lose in our community. It will make the problem even worse. And our housing needs assessment from 2019 has clearly stated that most dire need we have in this community is rental. And I guarantee you 5 years later, it's worse than what that study showed. I'll be surprised when we do our new assessment if it's not worse, because the problem has just it's exacerbated. And in our community is no different than any other community across the country. And we have to start making a difference. Whether you think the development's perfect, we don't live in a perfect world. We need to provide housing for people, and this is an opportunity to provide a lot of it. And I'd be remiss if I thought I come up with reasons why I could say to somebody, I'm sorry, we could have provided a housing unit for you in this community, but you know, it wasn't just to our perfect liking. I could never do that. We need this housing, and I understand where people's angst and frustration in that neighborhood is, because I'm very familiar with that neighborhood, having delivered there for several years. And I do have concerns about John Place and how that's going to be impacted. Absolutely. But for now, the road is only going to go through Beacon. Modi is going to do their due diligence and determine whether it's safe or not. And the fact that the building is so much further away from the other homes on Beacon Avenue is helpful for me. But ultimately it comes down to me, and I've struggled with this because I wasn't always supportive of this development, but there's been a lot of give and take, and there's been a lot of give by the developer, honestly. And from where this first came forward to where we are now in the crisis that we have in this community, in this country, in housing, I have to support it, because I think it's extremely important for not just the residents who can live here, the residents that do live here, but also for their business community. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. So I'll turn to Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in support of this bylaw amendment. I have much the same feeling as my eloquent colleagues, so I'm not going to repeat everything that they've said. I think the bottom line is that, as Councillor Garnett said, we do need housing in this community. We need it desperately. We are going to have housing targets imposed upon us by the ministry. That's coming down the pipes in the next few days, actually. And this goes a long way towards reaching those targets. Is it a perfect development? No. I sympathize with the concerns of the residents in the area, but I think on balance, the project has addressed most, if not all, of the concerns that have been raised to a satisfactory level. Yes, it could be better, but as Councillor Garnett said, in the real world, this is probably the best that we can hope for in this particular space. So I'm in support of it, and I'll be happy with the additional housing that's brought to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll speak in support of this zoning amendment for this project. And I will concur with colleagues on council who have spoken to points raised in the correspondence and points raised in public participation, for example, noise and other elements. A couple of things I'd like to touch on that I may have touched on a little in the past, but one came from a presenter during public participation this evening was the Galeran resident neighborhood feeling like second-class citizens and suffering from construction fatigue. And so I want to be the first to acknowledge that some what we might refer to as basic services and some amenities, and I'm going to describe particulars in a moment, had not been provided to the Galeran neighborhood, and that there has been a substantial amount of construction in the area. When 5 of us came on to the new council in 2018, and in our strategic plan, we identified a number of priorities, and one of the priorities was to staff made council aware at the time that underground utilities needed replacing along Galeran. It's almost a 1 kilometer stretch, and that we were aware that while there is a vibrant neighborhood there were no curbs, there were no sidewalks, there were no gutters, there was no proper parking spaces on Galeran. There was a school stop, there was BC Transit, and I could see a neighborhood considering themselves a second-class citizen without basic services such as that. That's not an amenity, that's a basic service, to have curbs and gutters and sidewalks. And the second one is with regards to amenity. There is a well-used path the town leases from has an arrangement with the Provincial Ministry of Highway. And that paved path, that was widened, which is, I think it's 3/4 of a kilometer. It's not yet finished. But substantial improvements costing, I think we've spent $750,000 to date, and it's going to go beyond that for completion. But we made significant improvements last term, and they're continuing with that paved path alongside the highway, which is important for pedestrians and residents of the neighborhood. It's widened, it has lighting. And so we have considered that. The traffic circle that is coming to completion now was first recommended by Modi. In fact, it was insisted by Modi in the early 2000s when a former project was approved, a commercial project was approved on that site. And unfortunately, the traffic circle infrastructure didn't come to be. And yes, congestion has increased significantly along Beacon Avenue West through McDonald Park Road, Galeran, and so on. But our council took it upon itself last term, and it's taken 5 years to put the partnership together with the airport and North Saanich, the funding agreement that was $60-some thousand to appreciate what the long-term transportation needs are from the Pat Bay Highway intersection all the way along Beacon Avenue West, McDonald Park Road, Mills Road, all the way down past the Sandown development back to the highway. And then we continued the partnership in terms of first costing at $5 million, and now at always nice to have some musical interlude. The price rising cost rising to $7.6 million. A traffic circle that was needed many, many years ago is coming to fruition now. Has that been, I mean, that's how the Galeran residents access and egress their neighborhood. I can appreciate the frustration over the time period that has been under construction. That's your everyday annoyance having to deal with that construction. But it is coming to completion, and unfortunately it's an inconvenience. It's a disruption, but it is coming to complete. So pedestrian and safety is important. That's why we did the sidewalks. It's why we did the pathway. It's why we've done the traffic circle. And the other fatigue, construction fatigue, is of course the Amazon industrial site, and of course before that there was the Titan Boats site, which is near adjacent to the neighborhood, and there will be, as described, some additional commercial development on airport lands. Those were vacant lands. Those lands have been vacant for decades, and it's industrial lands on the airport lands, which is a federal authority. And we have tried to be reasonable in terms of the referrals that have come to council and the recommendations that we've been made to have industrial. But there are always going to be challenges with a residential neighborhood immediately adjacent to an industrial zone neighborhood. So I do acknowledge and I do appreciate the feelings of construction fatigue over time. As second-class citizens, I would hope the Gallarin residents are feeling good about the improvements that have been made, in particular over the last 6 years. West Sydney in general has sometimes made those remarks, and we are now investing $350,000 this year to the fully accessible playground at Breathitt Park, which is also in West Sydney, and we have it in our plans to do similar improvements along the Kenora stretch, which is something that we have to work together with North Saanachon. So I just wanted to speak to those comments with regards to construction fatigue, and this project will represent some more construction fatigue, but we have had confirmed on a number of occasions, including tonight, that the construction management plan will not permit any construction vehicles to use John Place as part of the construction, as part of the project. The other item I want to touch on is affordability. It's understandable why it comes up in almost every conversation about developments, and I'm actually going to speak about it again for rental properties when we talk to the zoning bylaw, because we had some members of the public come forward on that this evening. But I want to speak with regards to some of the comments we heard about tonight about we shouldn't proceed with this project. It's not providing the below market or the affordable housing that the community needs. And first I want to, and I don't think you can do it too many times, state what the definitions are we use. It's in our zoning bylaw, but the definitions that we use. Affordability, used by the province, used by municipalities, used by the Capital Regional District, means that residents are not paying more than 30% of their income for their residence, whether it's rental or ownership. Below market means somewhere below what the current market rates are and affordability. What is generally acknowledged during my sixth year on the Capital Regional Housing District Board, and having seen, knowing that the Capital Regional District has over 2,000 affordable rental units that it owns or operates, that provide residences for over 4,000 residents, planned an additional 500 to 600 below market or affordable units are forecast by 2028. 70% of those units are affordable. Limited at 70% of those units are limited to 30% of the residents' income. Why don't we have more of those in Sydney, of those units that the CRD has built or the other nonprofit organizations? The challenge is economics. And this particular project, it was the only way you can get from below market to affordable is if you have provincial or federal funding to contribute to the project. That's the only way affordable housing has been brought to our market and to other markets in British Columbia, other markets in the country. And the challenges are the cost of land, the cost of the projects, and the size of the units. And unfortunately, even though it was considered in this project, and it was this project last came before council in late October of last year, and one of the things we council gave direction on was for staff to approach the CRD and other possible housing agreement partners along with the proponent of this project, to try to bring as much below market or possibly affordability to this project. And the funding isn't there to bring more affordability to this project. So do we not move forward with the project because we are unable to have more below market units, or because we're not able to have truly affordable? Council cannot control what the market rate is for the units. If we do not build more rental housing in Sydney, the rents will continue to stay high, or they will go higher based on demand. So we need this type of housing. As a colleague has indicated during the housing needs assessment, we have to do it, the province is telling us we have to do another housing needs assessment next January under their formula. It's going to say that the #1 need in our community is rental housing. And it is only, as another colleague mentioned, when the housing stock increases, and the province has begun to indicate that when vacancy rates start to approach 3% vacancy, that you start to see market rents become more affordable. So I understand the discussion around affordability. It's something that's discussed around this table and with our staff on a regular basis. It's discussed by all the municipalities and at the CRD, and we're doing our best to bring more below market housing and more affordable housing to our market. We applied for a $4 million federal grant that would have provided the opportunity for the town to be directly involved in below market or attainable housing, and our grant request was turned down. Langford's grant request was turned down. And we were applying to a multi-billion-dollar federal grant program, and we did not obtain that grant. So we will continue our efforts to bring more affordability and more below market. I'll leave my comments there, having touched on those two aspects, and my colleagues, I think, reasonably addressing many of the other concerns that have been expressed, not only this evening, but at prior meetings. I'll first turn to Councillor Duncan, seeing you first, and then Councillor Duck.
Yeah, thank you. That was detailed. That's why he's the mayor. I think one of the points that has come up, public comment brought it up, and of course, it was referred to by Councillor Duck with the APC's previous comments, and since this is obviously has a lot of interest now, I should probably go bring it back. But the comment about breaking this building into smaller pieces, and that was APC's one recommendation about, you know, for aesthetics that would improve this. We had a long discussion about that as well. A design option of that, with this cut into 3 chunks, was brought forward, or evaluated rather, not formally brought forward. And the problem was we were already discussing affordability and how these are very expensive apartments, and by breaking this into 3 buildings, that made it much more expensive, because instead of one air exchange, one apparatus for the heating and all of that, it multiplies it by 3. Now you've got 3 elevator shafts to build, 3 underground parkings to build, 3 ramps to build, and all of this stuff becomes multiplied by 3. The cost goes up. Would it look a little nicer and maybe increase the livability? Possibly, but it also increased the cost, just past the point of potentially viability of the project. And so understanding that, trying to keep the costs as low as possible, and while the other factors could be mitigated, the one thing that it couldn't be mitigated fully was the aesthetics of the longer building. That was subjective enough that trying to force the issue, and potentially losing not only several units because of the reconfiguration, but also making them much more expensive and potentially losing a project viability, that was discarded. So it's not that the developer didn't look at it, or that council didn't look at it. We did, robustly. It could not be done. Again, this is not a perfect world. We did the best we could with the conditions we had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you. Just following up, I missed one of my points, but also just to respond to my colleagues, that I am not against purpose-built rentals on this location. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great location. I just think we have to improve the livability here. To the cost of the project, if the massing was broken up, we have an example of that in our community. It's called East Shore Village, and it was developed that way one parking lot and has 2 elevator columns at one at each end. So it can be done. It's not unopposable. But one of my questions to you as my colleagues is just to think about, currently, as staff noted, CD 43 is not in the draft zoning, nor on the draft zoning map. However, it is defined in the amendment to provide multi-unit residential dwellings at a high density. And I'm wondering why we're in a rush to rezone this when all the surrounding areas are going to be RM7-WS in 2 months. And that definition of RM7WS from the draft zoning bylaws to provide for multi-housing units in the Galeran unit at a maximum height of 6 stories and single and 2-family housing where permitted by this bylaw. So what's the purpose of us rezoning for 2 months when all that area, and now we're going to have a specially zoned area within that area that's going to have the same definition? I'm wondering why we're rushing to do this when we could be just doing it as part of our rezoning and within the draft zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I don't know that, I'll speak for myself and leave to my colleagues that I can speak to a comparison of this CD zoned to RM7 zoning. If that had been a question posed to staff, we perhaps could have had that presented this evening. We're not finalizing this evening. We're giving 3 readings, considering giving 3 readings if we progress past second reading. Third reading will be part of the process, but it will be coming back for adoption, and perhaps we could have discussion of that particular point at that time. Well, turning to colleagues, I'm not seeing any further discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duck is opposed. The motion carries. I'll turn to, if I may, the same mover and seconder for third reading.
Move third reading.
Second.
Councillor Duncan and Councillor Rintoul. All in favor? I'm in favor. Opposed? Councillor Duck is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, Council. And we're now turning to bylaw number 2272, Financial Plan for 2024 to 2028. And I will turn to Mr. Hissick for an introduction, please, our Director of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council approved a 5-year financial plan that included a general tax increase of just over 6% for this year. The previously approved budget is now being formalized through the adoption of this financial plan bylaw. Like every year, there are a few additional items brought forward with the plan, and these are typically projects carried over for completion from the previous year. And you, Mr. Mayor, did a good job of summarizing what some of those large carry forwards are on the west side. Council will note that the actual tax increase ended up being closer to 5.9% due to some final changes to the non-market revenue. Prior to readings of this bylaw, there's one small correction to be made in the bylaw that was noticed after publication, and that's in Schedule A, in Section 3, in the permissive tax exemptions. The first sentence of the 3rd paragraph should be deleted. It's a remnant from last year that should have been removed. So with that introduction, I'd be pleased to address any questions that Council might have. Otherwise, the recommendation is to give 3 readings as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. Before going to movers of readings, I'll first seek if there are any questions from colleagues. Seeing none, if I may have a mover and seconder for first reading. Councillor Duck moved.
I'll second.
Councillor Duck, or Councillor Novik seconded, and I'll just acknowledge that we are moving that bylaw be adopted as amended by Mr. Hissick with that correction. Any discussion? Or sorry, all in favor? Motion carries. And second reading, we have Councillor Duck, Councillor Novik. Any discussion? Thank you, Mr. Hissick, for presenting that. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Yeah, just want to extend appreciation to staff in terms of, we started at a little bit of a higher number and we're able to bring this down. So I think staff did a tremendous job in helping us get there. And certainly, I think given the surrounding CRD tax rates, We should be very proud of what we've accomplished here in Sydney, and I think that's in part due to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. And third reading, moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Novick. All in favor? And that motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now turning to 5C, which is bylaw number 2273, 2024 tax rates. I'll turn to Mr. Hissig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving on to part 2 of the equation. With the budget for the year now set, a tax rates bylaw is required to ensure we bring in the required operating revenue to fund our financial plan. So this bylaw sets the tax rates not only for the town, but several other jurisdictions as well. There's a table in the staff report that illustrates the level of control that the town has over the various levies that are collected on the tax notice. So as I mentioned earlier, the tax increase for the average residential property came in slightly lower than projected at about 5.9%. This new percentage equates to about $99 for the average residence. Must be noted, though, that that's only for the municipal portion. A table in the report illustrates the full impact when all the jurisdictions are factored in. We're collecting an additional 135 in new taxes for the other jurisdictions for a total of 234. So the municipal increase is less than half of the total. The main contributor to this larger than average increase in taxes is the regional transit levy, which went up by about $66 or 41%. This being the highest increase in the transit levy that I've seen probably ever. And it's primarily due to service expansion and capital plans for the Transit Authority. If council has any questions, I'll be pleased to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Hissig. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. First of all, thank you for the report. I think it's really useful to citizens to point out that almost half of the tax bill comes from other sources. So I think that's a good thing for staff to have highlighted. One question that I had, one of the speakers tonight mentioned something about tax impacts for Galaran, and what with the potential zoning change. And so I know that we had previous discussion before about the value of the assessment is not likely to change. But what I was wondering was, once they're changed to, or if they are changed to M2 light industrial, does that mean that they get, their property gets assessed at that rate? Or do they get assessed at the residential rate? Or is it not relevant at all?
Assessments are always done on actual use. Zoning really isn't the determining factor.
Okay, that's great. That's fine. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no further discussion, I'll look for a mover and seconder of the first reading. We moved by Councillor Duck, second by Councillor Novick. All in favor? That motion carries. And second reading, Councillor Duck, Councillor Novick. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. And mover and seconder for third reading, Councillor Duck, Councillor Novick. All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Essick. We're now turning to item 5D, which is bylaw number 2274, tree preservation bylaw amendment number 3. We have considered this at previous meetings and given first, second, and third reading, and we have a recommendation to adopt. I'll look for a mover and seconder. So Councillor Duncan moved.
Second.
Councillor Novick is seconded. Any discussion? On adoption, no discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Gurnett is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We're now turning to Section 6, Development Permits and Development Variance Permits, and we're looking under 6A at Development Variance Permit Application Number DV100353 for, the address is 10222 and 10224 Resthaven Drive to reduce the minimum setback for heat pumps in order to allow 2 new heat pumps at a 2-family dwelling. We have one written submission on the agenda, one additional submission I believe both were in favor, and we do have considered this at a previous meeting. Turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I will move approval of the development variance application.
We have
Second.
Moved and seconded by Councillor Duck. Any discussion, Councillor Rintoul? Seeing none, all in favor, or Councillor Garnett, sorry?
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you asked Councillor Duck first. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to provide my appreciation and thanks for the neighbors on either side for corresponding with us to let us know that they were all right with it. It makes it much easier when they have that, knowing that the neighbors are on side with the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck, for acknowledging that input from adjoining residents. I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion carries unanimous. We're now turning to 7, which I would look for a mover and seconder that the minutes from our regular council meeting of April 8th be adopted.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries. We're now turning all the way down to, I have no mayor's report this evening. We're down to council reports. We have a council report beginning with Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mayor, and have 2 reports today. One is on the CRD Intermunicipal Task Force meeting, and just wanted to alert people to the fact that we're moving into another potentially extreme heat time of the year, and the CRD has a map up of just extreme heat management and just areas to be conscious of that. And they have a dashboard on their site where you can use, and it just provides information on how to prepare yourself for extreme heat, and I think that's something we should make sure gets out maybe through our communications to residents to take advantage of that. And the other is, we just passed a motion on a heat pump, for example, is that they have a home navigator program or portal that you can go into and do an evaluation on your property to see what you can have access to in terms of funding and purposes to put in, for example, a heat pump. And that's just another point on the CRD, just to have access to that. There was discussion at the recent meeting about the climate change. Obviously, that's one, the STEP code, and just how important that is in trying to integrate climate action steps into the development aspects of that. The one thing we had a brief discussion on relative to taxes is the transportation increase. And there will be a workshop for local government coming up, which most of us are aware of, that will help define how we can best build our active transportation network within the region and see that help us with climate action. And that's all I have on that. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Appreciate it. Not seeing any from colleagues. Please go on. Okay.
Second is on the South Island Prosperity Project. I sit as the liaison here on the Municipal Partners Committee. You may recall I reported on the local leadership day that was held last October, and the report is now being finalized and will be coming forward in the SIP, South Island Prosperity Project's AGM in June. And we'll be looking to present to councils and see if we can get municipal councils to take active part in the recommendations that are coming out of that report. And that's kind of where the local leadership day was meant to go, was the municipalities getting together and saying, okay, what can we do jointly? And that came out of that local leadership day, and it'll be sort of delivered to us as a council and say, okay, what can we do as a council relative to Sydney and its actions in that aspect? And the other 2 things that are happening is, you may well know that SIP is currently under a CEO search for to replace the current. She's stepped down. They have an acting, Dallas Gillison, who you may all know was very active in our community with the Chamber of Commerce. That CEO search is continued, should be finished by the end of May. I sit on the CEO search committee as the municipal rep, and we've had some really good candidates, so I'm looking forward to who comes out of that. And the last thing is just to reinforce the update coming in the AGM in June, and just looking to get direction for that, as well as in the next 6 months there'll be a presentation to each of the councils by partners from individuals from the Municipal Partnership Committee on moving forward as the first 5-year term of this organization looks for renewal. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. We appreciate the updates. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan in your report.
Yeah, thank you, and sorry for the late addition, but this meeting happened on Friday after the agenda date. So the update from the Airport Noise Committee is that there will be more construction on that runway that runs east-west, kind of along Ocean Avenue, where we had issues with noise before. It was mostly the backup beepers when they were moving all that soil around. The airport heard those complaints and responded by asking their all of their contractors to proactively turn off those beepers when they're working at night, and they said they've kept that in their notes, and they will be telling all of their construction personnel this summer to do the same thing. So hopefully that way we won't have that problem again. The construction period will be May 6th to July 25th. There will be more construction going on further in other parts of the airport, but hopefully they'll be further away from the residential area going up until September. And there's going to be a lot of like 24 hours a day, 5 days a week construction. They say they will be doing the usual dust control measures, so hopefully those neighborhoods won't be being dusted during that dry time. And they said that probably because of that construction noise, the beepers they've already taken care of, and that was the biggest issue last time that the new change communities there might notice is that because it's a runway shortening and because they're, you know, closing part of that runway and some of the aprons for other construction during the summer, there will be some changes in some of the flight paths. They'll be changing their approach and coming in at different altitudes. So some people who are not used to getting flight noise may suddenly discover that they're getting flight noise. Hopefully will be short term, though some people, they said because of that runway shortening for the different types of planes and the new angle they'll be coming in, conceivably there could be a change in noise, but they don't really know which way it will go. So, you know, if things change and you want to email or write into the complaint line, you won't go straight to a person who will answer the phone. You'll email them or input through their website, and then somebody will call you back or email you back. But you can do so, and they can see how much of that is something that is temporary during the construction and how much is something that they're going to need to track and mitigate. And that's it for the noise.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Seeing none, we appreciate your report. We're next turning to committee reports, and just before we go into those committee reports, including the zoning bylaw, I'll just call a recess until 7:35. Thank you. Okay, we'll look to reconvene now. I'll just state that we're reconvening our meeting at 7:35. And we're now on, under committee reports under 12A. And we're now, 12A is, the first item is the minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting of April 15th. We're receiving them on our agenda this evening. We don't need to pass a motion, but I will ask if there are any errors or corrections with regards to the minutes. Seeing none, we'll now move on to the three recommendations. I'll turn to Councillor Novick, who is chair of the Committee of the Whole meeting, to read in the recommendations. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First recommendation, I so move that the property owners of the lands to be designated as RM6R, bracket multi-unit residential dash rental, close bracket, be contacted regarding the proposed zoning change and invited to provide feedback.
Second.
We haven't moved in second. I'll turn to the mover.
Nothing really to add. We had a colorful discussion on this during committee meeting, so I think we're ready to move
Councillor
ahead.
Duck?
I'm going to suggest an amendment, just to be more inclusive based on public participation tonight and some questions about that. And my amendment would be such that the property owners of the lands to be designated as RM6-R, RM7, RM7-WS, M2, and those properties that are designated as have natural setbacks. All of those individuals, because their zoning is changing, be informed of these changes.
Yeah, sorry. There's reading the amendment and there's motivating.
Thank
but
you.
I am going to suggest a procedural, Councillor Duck, if I might, that we actually move forward with this motion, and your motion arising could be to speak to those particular aspects.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Other speakers to the motion on the floor? Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. This is a question through staff, because I know we had a speaker provide feedback on this, that, I mean, at this point in time, this is just a communications where we're not actually implementing this as RM6 residential, where we're taking this out for feedback. And a question was about what kind of provisions would be placed into a bylaw about, affordability as part of that rental, because, rental and affordability are kind of things that go together. So I just want to ask staff, at what point in this process would that kind of information be starting to get put into the bylaw for residents to kind of get a look at?
Through the chair to
Councillor Duncan.
Councillor
You
Duncan.
there, yeah.
By that information, can you be more specific about what you mean?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, for example, so we just put in place the zoning bylaw for CD 43, and it has, A through M, and it's got all of these descriptions about what that bylaw is. Now, at this point, we're just kind of saying RM6R is multi-unit and it's designated residential, but it doesn't have any of those kind of, this is what the description of that zone is. And we had somebody come forward in public to ask, what kind of things might end up in there, stipulating what sort of affordability might be part of that kind of package in that zone. And so at what point in the process did we start getting into kind of the RM6 and, A, B, and C, this is what's in that zone that kind of sets up what those buildings would look like, or what the boundaries of what a purpose-built rental should look like?
So it's the reason the zone is written the way it is currently is because it's not possible to retroactively go in and for the buildings that are on site there right now dictate some sort of level of affordability. That can only be done through a housing agreement, and another party has to agree to that housing agreement. The purpose of this zone is to provide council with a level of discretion when another application comes forward. And like with the 2180 Beacon Avenue West application tonight, at that point when an application comes forward, council would have the ability to look at that discretionary authority and require some level of affordability going forward. So it's really that information is more of a future-looking type of information where it's really associated with a redevelopment scenario rather than the existing building that's there now.
Thank you. So if I may, I guess it would be correct to say that any provisions that are made about affordability in a rental building going up is still going to be kind of done building by building and agreement by agreement as those sites would get redeveloped?
Yes, that's typically the way that happens, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Other discussion on this? I'll speak briefly, and in part to the speakers who came forward during public participation and asked about what this zoning amendment does for affordability of existing affordable rentals. So we understand that this particular amendment, or this particular new zone, RM6-R, will protect, in a sense, current rental properties that are in our community. And that is, for those properties that are now purpose-built rentals, they will have to be purpose-built rentals in the future. When earlier under the 2180 bylaw amendments, I was speaking to affordability. I was speaking to the definition of affordability in terms of 30% of income and below market, and what that comes. But there is another type of affordability, and the type of affordability is that there are purpose-built rentals in our community, rental buildings in our community that were built in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. And their rents today for the tenants that have been there, some who have been there a long time and some who may actually be more recent, are typically below market. And that's because of the condition of the building, the date of the building, the fact that the property's been paid for, and so on and so forth. And so the question that arose from the speakers this evening was, how does our policy, how does our OCP policy, how does our zoning amendment policy address keeping existing below market rentals that are older rental properties, not new construction, but older buildings do that. And we don't have a mechanism. We don't have a mechanism within our zoning bylaw. We don't have purview as a local government to say that a particular building has to keep, if there's going to be new development there, has to keep its rents at what the rents are today for those residents. The provincial government hasn't provided that. It provides all of what we're allowed to do as a local government, but it hasn't provided us to do that. And they haven't spoken to that at any point, given any indication that they would do that. And quite frankly, we can appreciate from hearing from those residents, and we can just appreciate as residents ourselves, and whether we're renting or whether we own, whether we were renters when we were younger or whatever, that that is a real challenge for these rental buildings that in effect are older buildings, but they're providing below market rents for the rents. And how do those residents continue to live in our community? We're talking about private property. We're talking about private property that can change hands in the private market. And what the town can do through our OCP policy and through our zoning bylaw is indicate what the uses can be on that property and provide. But I don't think there's any measure of density that we could provide that would guarantee that the rents would be what they are today. And we certainly have no policy tools to do that. So I just want to address those concerns. I think all members of council, I think staff, and the community at large accepts that is a real challenge for moving forward in our communities, and knowing that longer-term residents, whether they're single employees, whether they're young families, whether they're seniors, are faced with undesirable choices when their property is redeveloped. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question on all in favor. None are opposed. The motion carries. I'll turn to Councillor Novick regarding the second recommendation.
And Mr. Mayor, the recommendation is, and I so move that staff proceed with community engagement on the draft zoning bylaw number 2275 and report back to council with the results and any recommended changes.
Second.
We have a movement seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Nothing to add.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm fine with this moving forward with public engagement. I mean, I still have questions about ESAs. I think I understand Galaran fairly well now after spending an hour and a half with staff earlier this morning. However, I know we've heard tonight, and it took me a while to wrap my head around some of these things. And I think we need to give the community that extra time. So I'm fine with the motion, but perhaps I'll have a motion arising on what we might do to support that additional public engagement, or would it be best to deal with that as an amendment here?
So the resolution on the floor is with regards to community engagement. If you, without making an amendment first in your comments, if you have ideas to, in your mind, improve engagement or alter engagement, it would be appropriate to speak to that now. And if you wish to make an amendment to this motion as it sits, or whether you wish to make a motion arising, but I think it's helpful to speak to your views on the engagement as this motion is on the floor.
Okay, and to that point, is it okay to ask staff some questions in regards to that?
The motion is on the floor with engagement, so yes, questions are appropriate regarding engagement.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if staff could remind us or walk us backward again through, that deadline we have to meet for June 30th, and what capacity we might have to extend the engagement period. So that's one question. And the other thing is, what capacity might we have to send something out in advance? Like there was a suggestion made of a special town talk that perhaps could go out to everybody that got into, I'm envisioning something that has a bit more detail on the ESAs, bit more description about Galaran, more about the residential areas, maybe with a map so people can see before and after. And so,
actually, let's talk about the engagement tools and not the content of said tools.
Yes, okay. Well, just kind of trying to give an idea of potential scope.
Sure, we'll give staff a moment here. Mr. Newcomb.
Yeah, thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. I would say there's very little wiggle room on the timeline. As it stands, if the resolution that's, or the recommendation that's after this one regarding a referral to APC gets adopted by council, staff are essentially have literally hours to wrap up the minutes and the recommendations from that session, develop it into some sort of recommendation back to council if necessary, and move forward with, if there's potential changes to the draft bylaw out of that meeting. It's literally a matter of hours. In terms of shifting around timelines with the engagement period, I think we don't have that available time. Producing documents, engagement documents, things like that, it takes a lot of time. We're working on next week's engagement documents right now and working feverishly to produce those and get everything ready in time for what is a very busy 2-week engagement period. Where we essentially, in addition to responding to, resident inquiries, things like that, we're planning 2 open houses. We've got, 2 information sessions. We've got daily open houses here at the town hall in the mornings. All this takes a significant amount of staff time to prepare. Ms. Judson's done a very fabulous engagement plan for all of this, and we're trying to carry that out to a T. Essentially we've got the planning department, Ms. Judson, and other staff working all out to get this done. shifting the timeline or, adding additional work in terms of producing significant documents like Town Talk, which not only takes time to draft and prepare, but also, it's typically spends 2 weeks at the printer before it's mailed out. Just the time required to do all those things and the staff time required to do all those things, in my opinion, just isn't there.
Okay, thank you. And just one more, if I may. Does it help at all, like if we were to carve off just those essential elements that we have to deal with in the legislation and just focus in on those and set those other things? Does that help at all if we were to do that?
Honestly, I wouldn't. The work required to carve off part of the bylaw and essentially write 2 different bylaws is significant in and of itself. Staff have spent months putting this together, and even then it was a lot of work, and we were essentially working right up to that April 15th committee of the whole meeting. I guess what I can say is that I cannot confidently say we could split things off and rewrite essentially a new bylaw in time to meet the deadline.
Okay, thank you for that.
So, Councillor Keefe, I just wanted to interject on one of your earlier questions, or earlier part of your question to staff, with regards to timeline, and can we add to the engagement process? So we have 2 weeks of engagement scheduled to begin tomorrow, subject to us proceeding this evening, and then this will come back to council on May the 7th. We then, on the May 7th meeting, sorry?
Mr. Mayor, May 7th is the APC meeting.
I'm sorry. Sorry, this comes May 14th? May 13th, so my apologies on dates. So it would come back to council on May the 13th. And if staff can confirm that council at that May 13th meeting will be considering, council will have the original copies of any feedback provided by residents in terms of correspondence, and of course a summary of the feedback that's provided at things like open houses, the 2 open houses. But council at that meeting would be giving consideration to the first readings of the bylaw. And then we have to provide proper notice. Then we have to have a public hearing to adopt it. And as I believe Mr. Newcomb mentioned in his previous presentation, we basically have a 2-week buffer in this process to final adoption after the public hearing to do that. And I'm going to turn to Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a slight difference to the timeline you just gave. So the intent is that staff bring back that public engagement feedback at the May 13th council meeting. The intent there is to provide a fulsome report of everything we heard during that engagement period, and essentially from the draft bylaws presentation to committee of the whole on April 15th up until the end of the engagement period. So those 3, almost 4 weeks, I suppose. Provide all the feedback to council at that meeting, potentially with some recommendations on how the bylaw might be amended to address some of those points, and provide that meeting as an opportunity for council to discuss that feedback. First and second reading in the schedule we currently have wouldn't happen until May 27th. So there would be the potential that council could discuss some of that feedback at the meeting and provide staff some direction to make some changes to the draft bylaw in advance of that May 27th meeting.
So thank you for that clarification. So apart from staff themselves reviewing all of the engagement that is received and perhaps recommending to council some amendments to the draft that is before us now, the council will have all of that information and will have an opportunity at that May 13th meeting to perhaps give additional direction. And then staff would bring forward at the May 27th meeting, May 27th meeting, consideration, for council's consideration, first readings and then continue as I indicated with the public hearing. Okay. Mr. Newcomb, you did make reference to a 2-week buffer in your earlier presentation in a previous meeting. Where is that buffer?
So the first and second readings, potential first and second readings I referred to are currently scheduled for May 27th. If they happen on that date, we would refer the bylaw to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure as required by the Transportation Act. If the response is received by in time for the agenda for June 10th council meeting, potentially a public hearing and adoption could happen at that June 10th meeting. There's one meeting remaining, the June 24th meeting, prior to the provincial deadline of the end of June. So that would be the June, between the June 10th and the June 24th meeting is that 2-week buffer that was referred to.
Thank you. I just wanted to provide that, Councillor O'Keefe.
Yes,
Go
so
ahead.
that's helpful. So although the formal engagement period will be sort of wrapped up by the time it comes to council on May 13th, there's still going to be a public hearing. So presumably, people will still be able to submit feedback at the public hearing process. I guess ask that question through you to staff.
Well, it's council's obligation to receive all
Yeah,
community input
well,
through,
of course, and so
right up into including the public hearing.
So I'm just clarifying that point for the public, that although the engagement period might seem short, the formal engagement period that we're talking about in terms of open houses and that sort of thing, is that there will be time right up until early June for people to continue to provide comment.
I'll turn to Mr. Newcomb and then I'll turn to Councillor Gurnett.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to clarify that the quote-unquote 2-week engagement period is really the time period where staff drop everything and proactively go out there and engage by holding public information sessions, open houses here at the town hall. We believe it or not, we have kind of day job stuff that we need to get done as well. So those kind of engagement periods are sort of all in, trying to get the message out and proactively reaching out to the community. But that being said, from the minute that this draft bylaw hit the committee of the whole agenda on the 15th, we've heard from the public. We already have a long list of thoughts and potential amendments based on that feedback, and that'll continue right past, I think, the quote-unquote engagement period. So, we've been listening all along to the public, taking every comment very seriously, and, I think I guess in that sense, the true engagement is a fair bit longer than that sort of 2-week period where we drop everything and go out there and try to reach out to the public.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
thank you,
Thank you
Councillor.
for that, and I'll just leave things at that for now.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Councillor Gurnett, then Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I think it's important to, when we talk about the ability to speak and have the public hearing, that we need to reiterate that is only pertaining to the part of the zoning bylaw that's not involves legislation in terms of Bill 44 and the small scale and multi-unit housing. So it'll be only on the portions that we're allowed to have a public hearing on. And I think it's, I just wanted to speak to a little bit to Councillor O'Keefe about the town talk, and just to provide a little context in terms of actually the length of time it would take to get to residents in our community from the time it's printed and staff gets it and sends it to Canada Post. It then has to go through the process to get to the depot out here, and at that point it's a 3-day delivery. So it even actually adds more to it, so that it would even conflict the time even more. So thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Gurnett. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor. Further to the query, if I may, around timelines, and just through to staff to confirm if this is correct, but perhaps to Ms. Nelson. The meeting on the 17th of June is scheduled to be a committee of the whole, but that could be amended with notice to a special council meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I just want to understand that there could be another decision point opportunity there if special council meeting is held. Thank you. And then next to the point Councillor Garnett was making with respect to the timing for these mailouts, and I understand the Town Talk has some front-end time and some printing timelines that we don't control. Excuse me, but there was a suggestion from a councillor earlier that there may be a notice arising around expanding the notices that are going out to include a variety of other zones. We've got one already here. We've committed to send out for RM6-R through to staff. Are we comfortable then that the timeline for the notice that's already approved and potentially others that may be approved are going to get out on a timely basis in order to get feedback in to this process?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Rintoul, yeah, so those letters from the previous council resolution that just got passed, that's 14 letters. They all have the same wording. They're drafted and ready to go. So they'll go out essentially as ASAP tomorrow. So we're confident that those will reach the intended recipients in good time. Some of those recipients have already received more informal emails from staff just advising them of this process. So yeah, we're confident that those ones will serve their function.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul.
Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about how we can do our due diligence in making sure we reach out to the community. And I recognize timelines are urgent, but at the same time, so is the zoning bylaw. It is a critical piece of how this town will develop in the future, and the OCP has set the sort of the policy and the picture. The zoning bylaw is the details, and as we all know, the devil's in the details. And I'm just conscious of the fact that, yes, this document is dry, and we know it's boring for people to read, but I don't want us to rush that communication so that we're not reaching out to people. And we've got one motion that's looking to go out to 13 people, and the subsequent ones I'm suggesting are going to go out to a lot more people. And as Councillor Rintoul mentioned, that's going to take some time. And I would say if we don't do something like that, we're being negligent, because this is not the zoning bylaw.
Councillor Rintoul, you're motivating for a resolution that isn't yet on the floor.
Okay.
So I will provide you an opportunity after this to make a motion
Fair enough.
arising.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So if there's no further discussion, we'll call the question on this motion. All in favor? And that motion carries. Actually, before going to the third motion, I will turn back to Councillor Duck if you'd like to provide a motion arising.
So just for clarity, do you want each one done independently or just as one bulk? So each of the zones I'm proposing, which would be RM7, RM7-WS, M2, and natural setbacks.
I think there's potential impacts or particular discussion points if it's known up front all of the zones that you're considering. So while some members of council may not support one or other zone, we can deal with that. But I think there's
Okay.
a point. Your points will be valid with regards to all of the zones. So please include them all at this point.
All right. I so move that the property owners of lands to be designated as RM7, RM7-WS, M2, and natural setbacks be contacted regarding the proposed zoning change and invited to provide feedback.
Second.
We have it moved by Councillor Duck and seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Yeah, so as I was started to, and I apologize, Mayor, you're absolutely correct. I wish to motivate council to give this serious consideration, because these are significant changes to the existing zoning for a number of different locations. And it is important that we do everything we can in our power to let them know. And to that point, are some of these, can we wait on some of these and do it, and as it was suggested, maybe just address the provincial ones? But I'm thinking we need to do this as soon as possible to let people know what it means to move from R1, R2 to M2, for example. So they understand that perfectly clear that we've communicated. Yes, they may not come to the open houses. Yes, they may not read the bulletins. And yes, they may not even participate. But then we've done our best to make sure they're as informed as possible. And certainly those that are experiencing zoning changes need to know what's happening to them. The purpose-built rentals, or the one we just passed, RM6-R, is only affecting property owners, not necessarily tenants. So, you know, even the tenants, as was noted in public participation, aren't aware of what's happening. So this way, at least we're getting to those property owners of larger pieces of zoning that will be well informed of what their options are and understanding what that means to move that. And I give an example. Moving from in West Sydney, for example, moving to M2 will not allow those residents who have single-family residences to have a secondary dwelling if they didn't have it prior to May 2022. So they cannot take advantage of any of the current legislation because we're changing what the structure is there. So it's just, again, they may not, but we need to make sure they understand that purpose. And similarly, you know, somebody living south of Malaview, moving from RM2 to RM7, that they need to understand what that means. It doesn't mean that they're going to automatically lose their opportunities on their property, but that their property is now in a different zone and means it differently. And that may, for somebody that has, and we heard that in public presentation tonight, someone who has the natural setback, whether that's in Ray Creek or Kelsick Creek or on the waterfront, what does that mean to their property if their house burns down, if they want to sell and it is up for redevelopment? Can it be because it's a non-conforming now? So I think we just need to provide that kind of clarity to people so they're sure of what's happening, even if they choose not to participate. That's, I think, incumbent on us. As was noted in public participation, it is a two-way street, but we have to do the best to drive the truck down the street and let people know about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'm going to seek a question of clarification, either yourself or through staff. So we are, I think we're appreciative that the RM7 -W is with regards to the Galler neighborhood, and the M2 is with regards to the Galler neighborhood. So those two new zones cover the entire Galler neighborhood. We're understanding of the natural boundary zone, that is what any properties that are on the high residential properties that are at the high watermark. The RM7 zone, seeking to send notice to those. I guess my question through staff is, how significant is the change in zoning or increased density going from new properties becoming RM7? I'm appreciative of what it is for those other three, but I'm not immediately appreciative looking at the zoning map of how many properties or what the current zoning is of properties that are now proposed to go to RM7.
So if council thinks back to the presentation last week, the change there is that some properties which are currently zoned RM6 would become RM7 under the proposed zoning map. The difference between those two zones is a single story, so RM6 is 3 stories, RM7 is 4 stories. The setbacks are somewhat different. The lot coverage is the same. If you recall, in both zones, the lot coverage is proposed to decrease and the setbacks to increase in some circumstances.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I'm going to ask a question, and that is because I think it has import on consideration of this. Can staff, hearing those zones that are covered in this motion, what the timeline would be for staff to prepare those notices and the likely time of those residents receiving those notices, particularly vis-a-vis the public and open houses that are currently scheduled. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, if I could just maybe ask a question, I guess, putting it back to council, I guess, for clarity. What would be the intent, or what would be the focus of the letters and the level of detail, I guess, that each of those letters would encompass to those various zones? Are we talking about customized letters for each of those specific zones? Are we talking about something that is a postcard notification that your property is being impacted by the zoning bylaw to make the effort to check the draft zoning bylaw, the town's website, and contact staff for, with respect to questions? I don't want to speak for staff, but I would say that customized letters for specific zones takes time to craft. We'd want to be very clear in terms of the content of that letter and make sure that it's appropriately, I guess, detailed. So I would say that it would take some time. I would probably say that it would be a challenge to get those letters out to the respective property owners, certainly by the time we have our proposed open houses. So I think it might impact that timeline, and council might want to consider if we're looking at doing something, do we need to push those dates back with respect, because it's doubtful they would receive the letters in time for the open houses.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. So I will turn Mr. Humble's first question, if you will, to council back to the mover, if there was particular intent in terms of the depth or uniqueness of the notices to those four zones.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, staff. I would say that I haven't seen the letter that's going out to ARM6-R, but I would suggest similar wording, similar structure to a letter that's going out to people in those different zones. Thank you.
So, but it'd be fair to summarize that there would be zone specific. Yeah. Okay. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, a question through you to staff. I'm wondering, at what we're planning for the open houses, are we planning to have specific bits of information for people who are in Galaran, or people who are R2 owners, people who are on the waterfront or in ESAs? So I'm just wondering if that information is going to be available at the open houses, then maybe it's easier to say a letter that is kind of more generic. Changes are being made to your property. More details will be provided at upcoming open house. Is that something that's possible?
Through the Mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. So yes, there will be that type of information provided at the open house. The intent at the open house, the public information session? The information sessions are the evening and afternoon events at the Mary Winspear Centre. The open houses are the daily drop-in here at the town hall. So the information sessions, yeah. The intent is to provide an overview of those changes through a presentation. It won't be possible to go into the nitty-gritty during the presentation, but provide, a broad sort of picture of what's happening, and then invite people to sort of delve in with staff after that and ask questions and kind of get more information. So that's the intent there. A real challenge with these letters is that there's many different types of properties in Sydney, and in some cases not much is changing. In some cases things are changing. So a letter to all properties would be quite generic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just before turning to, actually, Councillor Duck, you're speaking for a second time, so I'm going to just turn, if there are any first-time speakers. Councillor Novick?
I recognize that time is an important consideration here, both at this council table and for staff in getting this organized. While I agree with this in principle, I'm not convinced that the practicality of it is going to bring any great advantage for those particular homeowners. I think that our communications program is sufficiently robust to ensure that all Sydneyites will see that there are going to be significant changes to the zoning bylaw, and if they need more information, they can come to one of the information sessions, address staff directly. I'm not convinced that burdening staff with a series of customized letters to different zoned properties is actually going to bring people to the table who might not otherwise come to the table. So for that reason, I'm going to vote against this, simply because the practical side of it, not because I disagree with the principle. I think the principle of getting the information out to the public is critical, but I think there are better ways of doing this than crafting individual letters by zone, trying to address them to multiple property owners, getting them out in the mail when staff is already consumed with trying to get this process on the rails and complete for June 30th. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll continue to listen to my colleagues, but I'm inclined to think that notifications such as what has been suggested would be prudent. And the reference in the motion, I think, to R2 ESA is an example of residents who will see a significant impact in the future development opportunities, for example, of their properties, along with many of the others that are included here. And so I personally don't know how specific the letter needs to be, other than to make their reference, and I'm even hesitant to suggest make the reference to the open house or to the information sessions, given how date sensitive they are, but to the process and to the town's website, which has this information, would perhaps be equally appropriate. But it's getting the word out, I think, in particular to the segments of the community that Councillor Duck has identified, would probably be very prudent. So I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan for a first time, and Councillor Garnett.
Thanks. Just knowing that we have such a time constraint, I want to make sure that if we do decide to send additional notifications out, it's for a good rationale, that I think these are people who are going to be potentially specifically more adversely affected by changes than any of these other residential zones. Now currently, because of the way Bill 44 is, and what we have in our other zones, effectively all of these zones, except for the ESA zones, have been upzoned, where you can now build more things. Either it's the same in very few cases, or it's being upzoned. You can build more units on here. That's usually not something where people are going to be blindsided because they had to rebuild a house, right? That's not something like they thought, well, I bought this, it was a single family residence, it burned down and I want to build a single family residence and now I'm not allowed. Now that's something very significant people need to hear about. Councillor Dick has raised that as a potential for, say, these R1 and R2 ESAs, because of a lot of these older waterfront properties are almost certainly non-conforming, probably even to our current bylaws, and if they burnt down and had to be rebuilt, they wouldn't be able to do them. So I could see that needing to be sent to these people, because their expectations in the future could be radically less than what they have bought at. Everybody else here, including the RM7 and the R and the M2, are people who, if they had to rebuild, would be able to build far more on their site than they currently are. So I'm not concerned about them being blindsided in that way. The idea that they might get to build, they have a single family residence, but now it could be 2 commercial units and 2 residential above it, really only matters if there's somebody who's purchasing as a developer and they want to know how to maximize the value. In theory, this changes their property taxes, because that's now more valuable property, but I would argue that changes everybody's property taxes throughout all of the zones. If I can build 4 where I used to have 1 residential, that would change it, and I don't know why we would single those ones out. And I don't see the rationale based on the consultation that was done for the West Side local area plan, where they already knew that all of these residential buildings in the M2 had the potential to become mixed commercial and residential. I don't see what the difference is. I don't know why they'd require special notification. I could maybe agree with the ones in the ESA, and that would drastically cut down on staff's time, because that's a single type of message there. But I don't know why we would pick out and basically give special advance notice to 3 other residential zones that we would not give to the R2s and the R3s and R4s who are being impacted in essentially the same way and being upzoned. So that's my argument there.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, and then I have a question and comments.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a comment. But first, I'm seeking clarification from Councillor Duncan. You're suggesting a mail out?
Councillor Duck?
Yes, I have some revisions to that, but that would, yes, so a simple answer.
Okay. So just to clarify, Councillor Garnett, the first motion we passed to the RM6R zones will be mail-out notices.
Yeah. No, just because this is a wider swath. My only reservation with that tactic is, I didn't think I'd speak twice to my former career in one night at a council meeting, but you're going to need to somehow get that information out to people that there's a mail-out coming, because I can tell you from first-hand experience that people will go days, if not weeks, without going to their community mailbox to get their mail. So they may not get the letter ever, even before you have your engagement, and it may not even have the desired impact you want. Just something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'm going to start with a question, and that is, we've raised it a couple of times and staff have commented, but in particular, my first question is, what is the scheduled date on making a distinction between the information centers, which are information sessions, of which there are 2 on particular dates that have been noted in the report, and the open houses that are in the mornings that are here at Town Hall? What dates will the open houses be here at Town Hall?
So the same week, April 29th to May 2nd, 3rd. So 3rd is the Friday, from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that's here in council chambers.
Thank you. So we're sitting here on April 22nd, and they will commence a week from today on the 29th. So a comment has been made with regards to, whether the notice, if these notices are provided to one or more of these zones, whether or not they would make reference to the open houses, or the open houses or the information sessions. I think that is a challenge, particularly if all of these zones are approved, and so we have to weigh to some extent the cost benefit of undertaking the notices if the majority of the people who receive these notices don't see them or don't read them until after the open houses and the information sessions have begun or been held. The other question, or the other comment I wanted to make, was with regards to a colleague's comment that we have very robust communication tools through our social media and website, and a comment that, optimistic comment that many or all Sydneyites will see that communication. The reality is that even if we use the complete suite of tools of communication, that is our social media, our website, our Town Talk, mail out notices, not everybody reads Town Talk. As much as we would like to believe, not everybody reads Town Talk. Not everybody reads a notice that is received in the mail. Not everybody reads a notice, an advertising notice that is put in the paper. What it does do, and the reason we have engaged in those tools before, is because it increases the number of people who will see it, and it becomes a cost benefit to that. But as I say, in my experience, is that even if we were to engage all of those tools, we would not reach every resident, but we would reach more residents, and that could bring benefit. My concern is the benefit of the residents receiving notice after their notice in the mail after the open houses and information sessions. So I'm going to turn back to any second-time speakers. Oh, sorry. One thing I am going to suggest, based on the comments from Councillor Duncan, is I will seek the mover and seconder's approval to separate, to consider the zones separately. So, Councillor Duck, you were the mover of the 4 zones. I need help remembering.
Yeah,
Councillor Keefe was the seconder. So we're still going to, we may have further discussion, but they'll all get voted on. So.
Right. I may have a solution to that. That's what.
So I will turn the floor to you. Sorry, I'm first going to turn to Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to provide some context around mailouts. So when the town undertakes mailouts right now for, say, a variance application or a rezoning or something like that, we are working with infrastructure that's already in place. We have computer systems that have addresses linked to mapping systems, et cetera, et cetera. What council sees right now as the draft zoning bylaw is basically colors on paper. There is no infrastructure behind that that provides us a ready system of divvying out those properties into certain categories. Having gone through this during the OCP process, it is a very long, labor-intensive process. It's a manual process, and staff spent during the OCP a significant amount of time not just getting all those zones, at the time, land use designations sorted and the information and maps together so that they would be provide a level of information that would be useful, but also because there's no infrastructure behind that, confirming that the letters are going to the right places. And, you know, I forget how many, there was a couple of thousand letters, I think. There were stacks of letters everywhere. We just don't have some magical system that separates all this out into ready-made categories. It's all done from scratch, by hand, manually. So I just want to provide that context, and I think I can be more definitive than Mr. Humble was. We simply cannot do that kind of process with this engagement timeline that we have. It's just not possible. During the OCP process, we had a full complement of staff. We don't have that right now. This would be very challenging to pull off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Yeah, thank you, staff, and thank you, colleagues, for that input. Here's my suggestion where you go is that, as Councillor Duncan pointed out, everybody's zoning is changing in some form or some content. And I think that the robust communication system may be supported by a postcard that is in your face and goes in as such in the newspaper, printed the same. Your zoning is changing. Contact staff, town hall, nothing else, because you don't want to cut into the timing of that, but put it in front of everybody that they should be looking at their zoning regardless of where they live, and take a look at that and contact town staff or look on the website as to what that means to them. Then they can ask that question. There's no time limit on that, because then it becomes whether they come to the open house, they look on the website, or they contact town staff, or they come to the public hearing. But it doesn't matter when they receive it. It may be just an additional way of getting them to engage, not just saying a notice saying, hey, the zoning bylaws here, you know, you should take a look at, but actually point to them that your zoning, every person that owns a piece of property in Sydney, their zoning is changing in some aspect.
Okay, so Councillor Duck, before going to other speakers, we have a motion on the floor with regards to 4 zones. I'm hearing inherent an amendment to all zones, perhaps all zones excluding RM 6-R. So I think we would need an amendment to all zones, amendment to include notice to all zones before having further discussion, rather than weighing. We have a motion on the floor with regards to 4 zones. I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maybe I misheard Councillor Duck. Were you referring to an advertisement in the newspaper?
I was referring to a complimentary, so you'd send out a postcard that says your zoning is changing. This would be an additional element to the communications, and that postcard would be reproduced in the paper in print, like on a page in the page. It's just, I'm sure staff understand what I mean by that. It's just a way of which they see it in a couple of places and they go like, oh, my zoning's changing. Okay, I need to pay attention to that.
Okay, I understand. And yeah, staff may want to comment on costs and resources associated with that, but
Okay, so before I seek an amendment to the motion that is on the floor to include however many zones is being imagined, I will turn to staff on the feasibility, logistics of sending what I will refer to as a simple notice to all residents. This is a mail out. I realize there's a advertising component to it, but we're referring to a mail out. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, definitively, creating postcards, mailing them out, they would arrive, essentially later than the information sessions, the open houses. So we would likely have to consider those timelines. I think the other aspect of this, and I didn't speak to staff about this, but we're sending out postcards to every single resident. There's a cost associated with that, and I don't know what the postage cost is, but it's relatively significant. But I think the bigger concern is we're hitting every single resident with this. Some of them are Bill 44 residents that, regardless, it's information for them. Their zone's going to change regardless of process. It's legislation. I would be concerned about what we're trying to achieve. Are we creating a bit of a firestorm here? I don't know. But I think there's implications associated with it that need to be thought out, and definitely in terms of the timelines associated with the open houses. So.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. That's important information. I am going to turn to Mr. Hissick in the spot. Could you give a ballpark, Mr. Hissick, of what mail out of this nature would cost?
Probably $12,000. You have to order the postcards, have them produced, get them here, and then mail them out at about $1 each. I would say cost is the least of our considerations here. There's many more compelling arguments.
Thank you. In terms of the feasibility, we've heard from staff now that these mail-out notices, as described, would not be received by residents in time for the open house sessions or the two information centers at the Mary Winspear Center. I would ask staff to comment that if we were to postpone those engagement sessions by 1 week, what that does to the timeline.
Can you give me 30 seconds to look at the...
I will give you 30 seconds, and actually, it is a large question. But while you're considering that, Councillor Duncan, you did have a question, and I cut that off because I was suggesting that the motion on the floor had to be amended, and we've since had some questions and motivation or discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, now that we're discussing all of the houses, I know one of the things that we did for our Parks Master Plan, and I believe the OCP as well, is we put up signs in different neighborhoods. Sandwich boards, and I mean, right now there's the sea level rise sandwich boards along the waterfront walkway, and I'm thinking maybe that actually might be the most effective way to do it. We've had a lot of discussion about how mail-outs are actually not always the most effective way to get people's attention, but a lot of people in Sydney walk their dogs because there's 3 dogs for every person in Sydney, and so I think that, I mean, especially along the waterfront, which is an impacted one of the most impacted neighborhoods. And so I'm wondering, since we already have a lot of those infrastructure, if that probably, the cost is probably similar, but the time might be shorter, because we might only be looking at, 10 or 20 signs, and we know roughly which sites, the same sites we had for, the OCP signs or the park signs, some of the, waterfront access points. And I think that would get probably quite a lot of eyeballs, just in the sense of the way we had the Parks Master Plan one. Like, there is a Parks Master Plan, go here for feedback. It's like, this is, the zoning bylaw is changing. It's got, a map on it. People can see where their zones are. Here's the web page that's got the engagement coming up, and contact staff. And that might really get it, a lot of those people that we would not be catching effectively with the mail outs either. I know, a lot of the reason I only know about any of this is that I'm on council, and if I wasn't, I wouldn't be paying attention, and unless it's in the town talk, I wouldn't know. But I've noticed that somebody's put up posters about evictions in Sydney all over town, and I see those everywhere because I'm out walking. And so I think Sydney can probably benefit from using the same kind of tactic and actually put out the hard copy notices, and we'll get a lot of response if staff thought that was more feasible.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan, and I'll turn that feasible question back to staff in terms of if consideration had been given or the resource implications of Councillor Duncan's suggestion.
Yeah, so Ms. Jedson and I just had a conversation earlier today about where to put those sandwich board signs. They're part of the engagement plan. Suppose we could up their number a little bit, but yeah, those are already in the works.
Okay, Council, I'm just going to hold further discussion at this point. We have a motion on the floor with regards to four. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. New.
Just on the timeline question.
Go ahead.
Ready to respond to that if you want?
Yes.
So open houses / public info sessions the week of May 6th. Obviously the May 13th council meeting wouldn't be possible to report back on that. So the earliest we could report back would be the May 27th council meeting. So that would essentially eat up that buffer. We'd be going right to the June 24th meeting. Earlier, Councillor Rintoul mentioned a potential meeting in between the June 10th and the June 24th. I'd be a bit concerned about that because we are required to notify MOTI with the zoning bylaw, and I'm not sure we'd have the time to do that if we started getting into, you know, a week between council meetings. So just a bit of caution there.
But thank you for that. But we would have the option of converting the committee of the whole meeting in the week between the 13th and the 27th. Yeah, May 21st. May 21st. Ms. Nelson.
Just a reminder, you can hold a special council meeting at any day. It doesn't have to be the Monday, so.
No, thank you,
Ms. Verhagen's just reminding me, because she deals with it a little bit more than I do, that there's a legislated 10-day period between first and second reading and the public hearing. So that would require a 2-week gap between those activities.
Okay. So, Council, we have on the floor a motion with regards to sending notice, mail-out notice to 4 zones. We haven't had that amended, although we've discussed a lot of potential amendments. I will turn to Councillor Duck, the mover.
Yes, I would like to amend the motion to say to all households, given the, I would like to amend the motion to all households. I'm looking for a seconder on that.
I'll turn to the second. Sorry, this is an amendment, so we needed a seconder on the amendment. I'm not turning to the seconder, I'm looking for a seconder to the amendment.
I'll second that.
It's seconded. Councillor Duck?
So given the feedback from colleagues and from staff on the feasibility of sending out notices to what are new zones, M2, whatever, they don't have those that information readily available to segment out those folks. So I think it would be much more efficient to send out a simple postcard that says your zoning's changing. Check in with town hall and staff, whatever the wording is, but just a quick statement like that is part of the engagement process. And yes, there will be somebody, as the mayor said earlier, there'll be somebody that pay attention to it, some will pay attention to the notice in the paper, et cetera, but it'll be another vehicle in which I think we have to be upfront and in front of people very boldly to say, you know, it's not just, hey, take a look at the zoning bylaw, it's your zoning's changing, whether it's provincially mandated and they can find that out and know what that means, or if it's part of a zoning change that we're putting in place, such as M2 or RM6-R, whatever it is, but just we've taking that step to really reinforce the people that zoning is changing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Duck. Before turning to the seconder and other speakers for discussion, I do have to pose a question to Council. There are zones that are not changing. So we have the Oceana across the street in one direction. We have the other 4-story condos on either side. This motion, as I understand it, is going to all residents. For residents in these particular buildings that have just opened in the past year or two, their zones are not changing. We shouldn't be sending notices to those residents. I'll turn to staff. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. There are still changes to existing zones. Even though the name of their zone isn't changing or the zone designation, there still may be slight changes to permitted uses and conditional uses. So there may still be changes within the existing zones.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Keefe as the seconder, then Councillor Novak.
Yeah, thank you. And just to build on the comment just made by staff, is that I think the notice that could be sent out wouldn't have to say your zone is changing. I'm sure they could come up with some wording that was just a little bit more generic, that the town is doing an overhaul of the zoning bylaw. Many zones are being changed. Check here to see how you might be impacted. So that's kind of how I see that rolling out, perhaps. In regards to previous comments about there's lots of engagement out there, are we going to get any more people? I think we will. If we take the effort to send something to somebody's house that comes from the town, I'm hopeful that they'll pay attention. In regards to comments made about what are we trying to do here, and are we going to create more fuss and bother out there? And that's a valid comment. I mean, to me, there's two things. There's those changes that are being made as a result of the OCP, but even some of those changes, like in the Galaran, are not exactly as we intended them to be with Galaran. The new legislation that got dropped in our laps has made us have to rejig how we're going to proceed with development in Galaran to ultimately get to that mixed-use village concept. And as I said earlier, Councillor Duck and I had the opportunity, staff were good enough to spend over an hour with us today to talk about Galaran, and we're people that are looking at the zoning bylaw, we're familiar with OCP, and it took me a while to understand, okay, there's some things that are different here, and if I'm a Galaran resident is not going to be able to put in a secondary suite, is not going to be able to put in a carriage house like some of the other residential areas. So there's some things in there that I think are important for them. And then the other aspect is the new legislation, and I think I presume that staff will make it clear at the open houses and on the information they provide on the website that there's two categories of changes going on here. These are the ones that we have no control over, that they're legislated, they have to take place in those R2 zones, but we're letting you know about it because it's significant changes being made to people's property and to their neighbors' property. So that's kind of how I see things moving along, and I think it's a good investment. It's not often that we make such a significant change to the zoning bylaw. So I think it's worth the extra effort to get the word out to folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Novak. Before Mr. Novak, Councillor Novak, Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. When staff conducted mailouts for the OCP review, and Corey mentioned this just a few minutes ago, that staff are about to drop everything to undertake what has been developed and very thoughtfully developed in terms of our communication plan, which council was made aware of in terms of this is our communications plan moving forward. So now we're adding an additional layer to the communications plan, just at the same time we're about to go out and undertake a significant communications plan, whereby staff are essentially 100% planning department is going to be focused on this. Now we're sending potentially mail-outs to every single resident about the zoning bylaw. I'd be concerned about capacity in terms of the number of inquiries that staff are going to receive as a result of this, questions, comments, folks that are going to be concerned even about Bill 44, which there's nothing we can do about those legislative changes. So to say that this is just something that we should do and we need to do and that sort of thing, that's fine. Council was made very clear and the community was made very clear in terms of what our timeline is moving forward. We have a limited time frame. Staff are going all out with respect to the zoning bylaw. staff are going all out with respect to this proposed engagement strategy. So this will have an impact, I guarantee it, on resources.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I did interrupt Councillor Novick. I'll give you the floor and then turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm wondering if I could perhaps pose a question through you to staff about this communication plan, because it sounds to me like what we're doing here at this table is amending our communications plan or media plan. And Mr. Humble suggested that we know what this media plan is, and perhaps I haven't the recollection that I used to have, but I don't remember seeing this communications plan to know exactly what is planned and what the reach is and whether or not it will achieve the goals intended, or at least the goals necessary for proper public engagement for this major effort on our part. So in order to know whether or not this additional mailing is necessary, could we get some kind of a brief summary of exactly what the media plan is?
Okay, just before we turn to staff for that, I just want to comment that while council is not aware today of every aspect of the communications plan, that is an operational matter. We didn't understand every communication that was done during the engagement of the OCP. We did approve we were given the bones, if you will, of the engagement plan. So I just want to comment make that comment first, and now we'll turn to staff. Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess if council thinks back to my previous report that had a section on engagement, there was a bulleted list that provided essentially a high-level overview of the activities that staff were proposing to undertake. I mean, partially it's, yes, it is an operational matter. It's also that report was 188 pages when you included its appendices, and so we were trying to provide a reasonable level of detail while respecting that, the report still needs to be read and there's a lot of information there. So, the more detailed version of that is just essentially those activities and how staff are proposing to carry them out in detail and timelines for us to do so. But the general list of activities is the same.
Councillor Novick?
With all respect, and I know you guys have worked hard, but I'm not sure that really answers my question, because what we're doing at this table, the motion that's on the floor right now, is really an amendment to that communications plan. We're saying we need another layer of reach to the public for the purposes of making sure that everybody knows what's coming down with the zoning bylaw. So if we're voting on that, it means that we either have or should have a very good understanding of what's already planned. And I'm not sure that's the case. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll just interject. For example, I don't know that it was in the list that there was going to be sandwich boards. Yet we came up with the idea and had some discussion about sandwich boards, and then we find out they're already in the communication plan. Should we have known about sandwich boards before tonight? I don't think so. I think that's an operational thing in the communications plan. So your points are taken, Councillor Novick. My speaking list is Councillor Duck and Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, so staff have indicated this will stir up questions and inquiries and more. I hope so. I hope that's great. That's what we want to do. We want to stimulate our residents to ask questions about the zoning bylaw, because it is a dry document. But if we can get them out there and look at it, because this is the operational manual for the OCP. And as I said earlier, the devil's in the details, so we want everybody to be as informed as possible. Some will choose not to be. But I think it's important that we get that information out. If this is an addition to the current communications plan, then I think it's a welcome addition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. Similar to Councillor Duck, I know the comment was made that there's a concern that if the more engagement we could do, that's going to generate more questions and more comments. And so I think, well, that's a good thing, but I wouldn't want us to say, we're not going to do any more further engagement, because that'll mean more people will provide feedback. I mean, that's exactly what we want people to do. If it means that we need to add in an extra special counsel or whatever to deal with that, I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would expect that if council supports the amendment to this motion, that the timeline likely will shift by circumstance. And we heard earlier when we discussed the timeline that there's a potential for a 2-week buffer at the back end of this. I think the expectation on the part of council is that those timelines shift just by nature of the sheer volume of correspondence that it may well trigger and dialogue. So I do understand staff's concerns with that. I concur with my colleagues that we want to raise awareness of this. But ultimately, I go back to Councillor Duncan's thoughts with respect to, in particular, where the greatest implications arguably would be, and that being R1 ESA and R2 ESA. And a question through the chair, if I may, to Mr. Newcomb. You'd mentioned that it was quite burdensome during the OCP process to facilitate a mail out, given that the nature of the changes that were occurring. If R1 ESA and R2 ESA were the only two receiving the mail out, is that a more reasonable expectation of staff with respect to the timeline constraints?
Mr. Newcomb.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Rintoul, anything that delves into specifics like that is essentially an equal amount of work. There's a large number of properties in those two categories, and putting that information together is time consuming for sure. I would also say, just because I heard a comment earlier on the R2 ESA and R1 ESA question about the impacts, it sounds to me like this is about the natural boundary setback. And I just want to be clear that the natural boundary setback applies only to new development. The Local Government Act specifically protects existing properties from the application of that setback for those existing buildings. If there was a fire or something, the Local Government Act provides for a mechanism to rebuild at that existing setback. So there really is no impact. The impact of the new natural boundary setback is only when the property is redeveloped. And as I discussed with the two councillors this morning, the other changes in those R2 and R1 zones that adjust the setbacks toward the road mean that the actual impact of that on the built area potential for new development is actually quite minimal. So I confess I'm hearing a lot of discussion around this natural boundary setback issue, and I'm just wondering if it's based on factual information, because I've heard some concern that I think is not entirely justified given what the Local Government Act says about setbacks like this.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul? No? You good? Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to comment that I do believe staff has designed a rigorous engagement process, and I also want to make a comment that I've made in previous meetings, that to be cognizant of the fact that we're down a planner and staff in that department. And my concern, and I've not heard this really discussed here, is the overburdening of our staff. And may just seem like a little thing with mailing out letters, but it adds on. Our staff is working incredibly hard right now in the planning department specifically. They're being, by my account, they're being piled on by the provincial government. I don't think it's fair, but it's what we're having to deal with, and they're taking the brunt of it. And I think when we start looking outside of what they've prepared, which they know they have the capacity to deliver on, it concerns me. It concerns me about burnout and how that's going to impact them in other duties, which they have to carry on as well as all of this. And I think we lose sight of that, is the fact that they have a job on top of all this legislation and everything else we're going through that they have to do on a regular basis. And I'm just really concerned that we're going to tax them to an absolute limit. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. I'll speak for a moment, and And somewhat along the lines of Councillor Garnett, and I think Mr. Humble's point is, you know, one aspect of it was, well, this will generate this amendment would generate more input, and isn't that a good thing? Well, of course it's a good thing. But one of the points Mr. Humble was taking is there is a resource, and Councillor Garnett was speaking to that. And so we have heard directly from Mr. Newcomb tonight that staff are intending, in the planning department, in our communications, to go flat out, starting tomorrow, for the existing plan that is in place. And so to layer this on, a mail out, however simple it might be, and the cost is, as we've heard from staff, is the least of the considerations, is a resource issue. And I can't support it as it is, because I've made reference to the concern that if this notice was to go out, and I acknowledge and say it's a good thing that we would get additional input, but people are going to be receiving these notices when we've already held the open houses and the two information centers. And think for a moment as a resident. We're talking about how important the zoning bylaw changes is, and you receive your notice, and then you go to the website and it says the open house and the information center at Winspear was last week. I can't support it unless we change the timeline, and we've heard issues with regards to changing the timeline. Councillor O'Toole indicated that if we do approve this, that the timeline would naturally change. I think we would have to have a comment from staff on that, and we would have to give direction as to whether we are extending the public engagement timeline by a week. That is postponing those open houses and information centers by a week. I'll leave my comments there. I believe Councillor O'Keefe was next on the speaking list.
No, I think I'm good for now, thanks. I'll just wait for the mover of the motion to see if he might want to amend it further in terms of extending the timeline.
Just point of order, I don't think that was in the motion.
It's not in the motion. I have spoken to it in terms of my motivation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, look, I think the mail-out's important, but I'm I hear the mayor's comments and staff's comments. Could we ask staff again to speak to the prospect of the schedule slipping by a week to accommodate the mail-out on a timely basis, so that they would be aware of open house / information sessions, number one. And number two, are we aware at this point of whether or not any municipalities have requested an extension from the province from the June 30th date?
Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I can answer number two. I don't know the answer to that question. As for number one, if the open houses and public information sessions were to happen the week of May 6th, staff would be reporting back to council with the outcome of that public feedback at the May 27th council meeting. Possibly that could happen at a May 20th special council meeting, although that's a fairly tight timeline for putting together a decent amount of information. More realistically, I guess it's the 27th. As I mentioned earlier, that just takes away that 2-week buffer. And so we're into June 10th for first and second reading. The next day after that meeting, we're sending a referral to Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, hoping that comes back in adequate time. Again, the next morning, the morning of the 11th, we're sending the required advertisements to the Peninsula News Review for publication that Thursday, the 13th of June, and then again the 20th of June, because we're required to advertise twice. And then the 24th would be the public hearing and potential adoption. I think I missed third reading in there, but Ms. Nelson knows where that fits in. Just a no mistakes timeline, I guess you might call it.
Councillor Rintoul.
it's a significant undertaking for the community as a whole. It's a part of the piece in the puzzle in terms of our own OCP, that we knew we would have to undergo this process. And granted, Bill 44 may have presented some complications with respect to what needed to be accomplished, but I'm inclined to think in the best interest of the community at large that we should look to amend the schedule as Mr. Newcomb has suggested, with the understanding that that takes away, the latitude that was in there previously, the 2 weeks latitude, on the basis that this motion as amended passes, that we would need to do that. And I don't think that excludes the possibility, the probability of, this community and potentially other municipalities reaching out to the province closer to the deadline, seeking an extension, particularly if we receive a delay from the MOTI response. Not suggesting there's a guarantee that that would occur, but I don't think we'd be alone. And I guess that would be the last resort, as opposed to amending the schedule as was suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. Can I suggest a possible amendment to the amendment with regards to the timeline?
Again, it wasn't part of the original motion, so.
No, it's not part of, sorry.
So I can an amendment that indicates that. Is that what you're?
Sorry, I was asking Councillor O'Toole if he wished to do an amendment to the amendment based on what he spoke to.
Certainly.
And I would turn to staff. If council is seeking to go in, considering the direction that has been spoken of, we should do it by resolution with regards to the timeline.
Point of order?
Yes?
We have a motion on the table, which we can then reset the timeline and a motion arising, but the motion on the table doesn't contain that and didn't include a date on it.
I appreciate that, Councillor, but there may be council members, including myself, who would give consideration to this amendment based on whether the suggested amendment to the amendment passes or not.
I don't need to change it.
Mr. Newcomb.
In terms of timeline, I think the motion that the second recommendation on the agenda there, I think that's sufficient for us to do our thing. If council resolves to have a generic mail out go out town-wide, and the practical result of that is that the open houses and the public info sessions get pushed back a week, I don't think any additional information is needed apart from the resolution to send the town-wide mail out.
Thank you. Okay, so we are dealing with the amendment on the floor. Is there any further speakers? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Garnett is opposed. The motion carries. We're now back to the amended motion as amended. Is there any discussion?
Can that motion as amended actually be read out so that we're just all really clear? Because there's been a lot of amendments going around.
Well, the effect of the amendment is to replace the original motion, but
Yep.
procedurally, we still have to call the question on the amended original motion. But Ms. Nelson?
That the property owners of the lands, actually we should word that the property owners to all households on the lands to be that the property owners to all households be contacted regarding the proposed zoning change and invited to provide feedback.
Mr. Newcomb.
So typically when a mail out goes out, it goes to two categories: property owners and occupants. Property owners can be anywhere in the world. Occupants are generally at the place of residence, which is within the town of Sydney. So it'd be great to have some clarity around the occupants of the buildings of the town? Are we talking just?
Is that a recommendation, Mr. A prudent
I guess
recommendation?
a request for clarification. Are we also talking commercial properties, industrial properties? Are we talking about all land uses or just residences? Are we talking about tenants and owners, or just those in residence?
Thank you. Yeah, we need some clarification, and I'll turn to the mover. All residential property owners?
Yeah, I would suggest that's what we want. All residential property owners of lands in the town of Sydney be contacted regarding the proposed zoning changes and invited to provide feedback. And that's, oh, sorry, all residential property owners and occupants. Sorry. Seconder?
Okay, so that's not a motion, that's clarification of the motion on the floor, which staff were seeking.
So I'll read the motion that the property owners and occupants of all residential households designated in Sydney be contacted regarding the proposed zoning change and invited to provide feedback.
Okay, that's clarification of the motion. Sorry, Councillor Winfield, did you ask? Who asked the question? For clarification on the motion? On the floor? Okay. Councillor Duncan, you asked, does that help?
Yeah, that helps, thanks.
Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Verhagen's just pointed out to me that the our ability to separate out on mixed-use properties, our ability to separate out commercial versus residential tenants, occupants, owners is manual?
Yes, it would be the same for industrial, Harbor Road, Marine. All of those have some dwelling units on those properties with other uses. And some commercial, industrial property owners may be concerned to not receive the notice. So.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb and Ms. Verhagen. Council, this is one of the challenges of a motion of this magnitude on the fly. Councillor Keefe?
So if we removed, you had dwelling units in the motion, or occupants? Okay, so would it be easier if it was just all residentially zoned land? I'm just looking for guidance from staff in terms of is there a way that we could focus in on?
I'll try to assist with that. All residential and commercial?
I think one option is perhaps the same mechanism we use for Town Talk, which is the bulk mail-out process. It just goes to every address in a postal code, essentially. The challenge with that is that it misses non-resident property owners and can miss other buildings where bulk mail is rejected. Ms. Judson informing you there's a way to push to get more coverage, I suppose. This is a glimpse into some of the challenges we face during the OCP process. It's a complex system, and our system for doing these mail-outs is based on a very predictable process that we're going beyond here. So
would clarification be to do a bulk mail-out? Ms. Verhagen?
From staff's perspective, it would be very challenging to separate out residential properties from commercial based on the draft zoning bylaw for the reasons Mr. Newcomb indicated, that the map is colors on a map. It doesn't correspond to our existing land database system as it's set up now for the existing zoning bylaw.
Thank you, but I think from what Mr. Newcomb said and what I was commenting on is that it's not, if it is using a bulk mail-out, it is not distinguishing between residential property owners and occupants and commercial property owners and occupants. it's going to all, with the exclusion of those who are refusing bulk mail, and there may be
Who said zoning bylaws were dull, boring,
Sorry?
and whatever? I honestly, I think if a mail out is going to happen, the most straightforward way is just to send it to every single address in the town.
So, Ms. Nelson, could you read, or Councillor Duck, could you read the intended motion, please?
Right now, I have that all residential property owners and occupants to all lands in Sydney be contacted regarding the proposed zoning changes and invited to provide feedback. So are we looking to say that all property owners and occupants of land in Sydney?
I'll turn to staff if that's acceptable.
I think that covers it. This is not bulk mail out. This is a directed mail out to basically every address and occupant in our system.
Okay. Does anyone need Ms. Nelson to read it one last time? No. Okay. If there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Myself and Councillor Gurnett are opposed. The motion carries. Council, we do have, and I'll turn back to Councillor Novick, the recommendation 3 from the Committee of the Whole meeting.
The recommendation is, and I so move, that the draft zoning bylaw number 2275 be referred to the regularly scheduled May 7th, 2024 Advisory Planning Commission meeting.
Second.
Any discussion?
I forgot, I didn't have my mic on. I hope that was heard.
Sounded like you did.
Okay.
Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? That motion carries unanimous. We're now moving to staff reports. We have the 13A, which is a sponsorship policy AD-022. This is an updated report, and I'll turn to Ms. Judson for an introduction, please.
Thank you very much. So the sponsorship policy being considered this evening has been updated from the version first presented to Council earlier this month. That was partly from efforts made to make it as simple as possible, so the writing of it has just been made a little clearer. But it's also as a result of additional consultation that we did with community groups. So the key difference in this version is that Peninsula Celebrations would now need council approval if they wish to have a title sponsor on either the town's 2 parades, so the Canada Day Parade as well as the Sydney Sparkles Parade. The 2 parades have traditionally had presenting sponsors, but over this past year, Peninsula Celebrations were beginning to transition to title sponsors. And so this would have changed the name of the parade. One of the community groups we consulted suggested that because of the scale of town investment in these parades, in particular the level of in-kind staff support that staff provide for the parades, that any change to the parade name itself to include a sponsor should come before council. We reviewed the scale of staff investment in these 2 parades and agreed with the suggestion. And so then we reconnected with Peninsula Celebrations, and they confirmed that they are comfortable with this change. So they would stick with presenting sponsors. If they felt it was necessary to involve a title sponsor, they would come to council for that. All other feedback on the sponsorship policy was supportive. We also added an additional legacy sponsorship to the policy that we'd overlooked before. Pattison Outdoor owns 4 of the town's bus shelters, and they use these for advertising, and this constitutes a long-term sponsorship presence. This agreement has expired, but it remains active today as a carryover. If a renewal were to take place, council approval would be required. If this sponsorship was not approved, we'd need to replace and maintain new bus shelters in those locations. Thanks for giving this policy your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Judson. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. If not, we could have a mover of the recommendation. Councillor Keefe.
I'll move the recommendation that the sponsorship policy AD 022 be approved.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? I just thank Ms. Hudson for the additional engagement, and seeing no I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now turning to item 13B, which is the BC Hydro sublease for EV chargers at the Mary Winspear Centre. I'll turn to Mr. Hissick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council recently approved changes to our lease with Mary Winspear Centre to allow a sublease of a portion of the property to BC Hydro for electric vehicle charging stations. This is the second part of that arrangement, the sublease to BC Hydro. The lease highlights are covered in the report, and once approved, the detailed design will take up to 16 weeks. We expect the charging stations to be in operation sometime in the fall.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. We have had this come before, so we could turn to questions or a motion to put a motion on the floor and then questions. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. Just because I'm not knowledgeable on this, and when I read that under the referral to SPAC portion, the BC Hydro's response to chargers meet U.S. Access Board recommendations. Is there a Canadian equivalent, or do we just rely on that particular standard, or Canadian standards different than American standards? Having no knowledge of this, I'm just curious if there's any difference.
I would think that our electrical provider would be using the most readily accessible standard that's available to their manufacturer, and if there were a Canadian version, they would be quoting that. But it's not just where they operate, but it's where their manufacturer of this hardware operates.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Novick?
Thank you. Through you to staff, Mr. Mayor. I'm curious as to why there's no revenue sharing in this agreement. We're paying a fee back to Mary Winspear Centre for the parking lot lease, and now we're giving a portion of that to BC Hydro, who is going to invest some money, it's true, to build a charging station, but they're going to be charging people for the ability to plug their cars in, and they're going to be making money off that, and I'm curious as to why the lease doesn't allow for even a small portion of that to come back to the town. Thank you.
Through the chair, that simply is not their model at this time. There's a significant investment required to build these things. Perhaps in future there will be some capacity for revenue sharing, but right now that isn't their model.
Councillor Novick?
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. It wouldn't be my model. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn, do we have a mover, please, for the recommendation? Councillor Rintoul?
I'll move the recommendation that the land lease with BC Hydro and Power Authority to allow the installation of electric vehicle charging stations in a portion of the employee parking lot at the Mary Winspear Centre be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries unanimous. We're now turning to item 13C, which is the monthly building permit report. This is for information only. We don't require a motion. Are there any questions for staff or any comments? Seeing none, we'll consider that matter and go to done and go to 14A, which is correspondence from the CRD regarding CRD bylaw number 4588, Regional Parks Loan Authorization. We have a letter and substantial other information from the CRD as background. I would look for a mover of the recommendation.
I'll move that council consent to the CRD adopting bylaw number 4588.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah, I was interested to read this package actually. The CRD puts out lots of information in packages, so not always fun to go through, but to see that they were putting forward this loan authorization so that they could do some major improvements in separating bicycles and pedestrians along some of the most highly used portions of the Galloping Goose and the Lochside Trail, and then seeing the actual numbers of users, you know, up to 5,000 people per day in some of these sections. It's incredible. As part of our active transportation network. And so I was very excited to say I would consent to this, and then I realized that this is only for those sections. I mean, it's many kilometers in the core through Esquimalt and Victoria, but it doesn't include up here where we know that we get comments about, you know, our portion of the Lochside Trail needing that separated space and to be widened as well. And so I'm hoping that when we adopt this, and we know that this is part of a long-term strategy that the CRD has, that the next time some of this loan authorization will go towards improvements going up the peninsula as well. But in the meantime, I'm happy to support the Corps in their strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. If I might add to that, is that this has been a long process, as the background reports indicate. And as your representative of the CRD, I've also been sitting on the Transportation Committee where this has worked its way through. And one of the things touched on in the staff reports, but certainly discussed at length, is the CRD's application to significant grants to help finance this project. And we're talking about grants in the millions of dollars. We have not been successful. CRD has not been successful to date in those external grants. An example, just locally, is we received a $5 million grant with regards to the traffic circle. The CRD will continue during this 5-year project to pursue significant grants. And the hope is that certainly the province in particular does provide grants. They have grant streams, provides grants to this project, such that this loan, the entirety of this loan authorization bylaw does not go to those core projects, and there would be funding available for projects elsewhere in the system going forward. Any further discussion? Councillor Gurnett?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And thank you for the information. When I looked at this, first thing, it was staggered by the amount of money, $50 million, but more so, even with our lower interest rate through Municipal Finance Authority, debt servicing of $5 million, and I put that in context of the fact that we just had a consent for wastewater in an amount of $7 million, so the debt servicing is actually going to be over, if they have to take all the money out, will be basically almost what we're taking a loan to do wastewater management on the peninsula, and that's just shocking to me. But that information you provided was key, because that was one of my questions, because from the Transportation Committee on the 19th of July, they talk about the alternative, and then there's two recommendations. One was to report back on September 27th with options to generate additional funds through non-tax revenue, and then there's no report on that. So it was kind of a missing piece of the puzzle for me.
Sorry, there was reports, and actually it came to also to the Parks Committee, which I chair, and that was consideration of expanding paid parking at parks beyond Thetis Lake and another park, and that did not pass committee or the board. But it's one other thing that I should have mentioned is that this is a loan authorization bylaw. It does not mean that the money, and is in terms of the budget, it indicates that approximately I'm forgetting the amount, but it would be borrowed in increments in each of the 5 years. But but the board actually needs to approve each of the loans that are made under that. And as I said, there's seeking of external grants to offset significant portions of the overall cost. But you had the floor, Councillor.
Sure, yeah, no, and that was an important piece for me, because it read in this report as if we're just going to debt servicing and taking that, and there was no mention of, there was no trail from trying to find other external sources, and so that worried me that we just sort of were putting, but you're providing context, which is important to me, to know that's still going to be an ongoing thing, and it's not just going to be simply, let's go to the debt and leave it at that. You know, and I understand why they want to do it. They want to push up the time frame 6 years as opposed to 20. But I think it's important for the taxpayers to know that it's not, we're not just always diving into taking out huge amounts of potential debt when there are possibly other options to help offset the cost. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gannett. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? And that carries unanimous. And so we do have 5 items of correspondence for information. We're receiving those by virtue of being on the agenda. And we'll next, we don't have notice of motion or motion to go in camera this evening. I would seek a mover and seconder to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Duck, second by Councillor Gurnett. We are adjourned.